Chapter 636. Cuny Matty was at the peak of the see-through realm. She had cultivated for countless years, and her skills were extremely profound. She was very experienced and had a great reputation in the cultivation world. However, compared with Ning-Ke, she was nothing. Moreover, her natal iron staff had been broken by Ning-Ke in the nunnery. What could she do now with her bare hands? Sensing the sudden change of the aura of heaven and earth behind him, Ning-Ke lifted his right hand that was holding the hilt. With a clang, the padao was unsheathed. Then, like a flash of lightning, it pierced through his armpit and deeply into Cuny Matty's lower abdomen. Cuny Matty's face was pale. She slowly sat down on the ground, but her hands were tightly holding the padao. There was an extremely crazy smile on her face, as if she did not care that the blade was cutting her fingers. In Ning-Ke's understanding, this aunt, who had a very high status in the Buddhism sect, was ruthless, shameless, and cowardly. He did not understand why she still wanted to sneak attack him after he let her go. He asked why. Cuny Matty coughed up blood and said with a smile, "Because I want you to die." Ning-Ke thought for a while and understood the old woman's intention. He pushed the padao forward with his right hand. The blade cut off several of the old woman's fingers and penetrated her body, bursting out a spray of blood. He had killed too many people today. He was numb, tired, and even a little sick. Therefore, he did not want to kill any more. However, it did not mean that he did not dare to or could not kill. Cuny Matty cried out in pain and slowly closed her eyes. Her body was still hanging on the blade and she died. Many years ago in the Palace of the Wilderness, Ning-Ke saw this woman for the first time. From that day on, the story of resentment began. He had never suffered a loss in front of this old woman, no matter in terms of seniority in the cultivation world or the rapid improvement of his strength. However, at that time, how could he have imagined that one day he could kill this old woman with a casual strike? Over the years, he occasionally thought that he could use Cuny Matty's name to humiliate her when they met again in the mountains and rivers. He would shout, "Fuck you," in a heroic manner and then do whatever he wanted. However, after today, whether he regretted it or not, he would never have this chance again. He pulled out his padao and looked at Cuny Matty's body. He remembered that her family was killed by him. He thought silently, "I hope your family can reunite, whether in the underworld or the pure land created by Buddha." Chi Mei walked out of the crowd and looked at Cuny Matty, who was lying in a pool of blood. He put his palms together and said in a trembling voice, "Buddha is merciful." Lu Chenjiao walked over slowly and knelt beside Cuny Matty. She reached out and pulled her into her arms. She lowered her head slightly and looked very lost. She felt sad in her heart but could not speak or cry. Ning-Ke turned around and looked at the back of the crowd. He felt that the aura was getting closer and closer. After confirming that he could not leave, he began to make preparations. He stretched his right hand behind him, his fingers trembling slightly. A carriage slowly entered the White Tower Temple and came to the back of the crowd. The 16 horses pulling the carriage were so tired that they were foaming at the mouth. They were about to die from exhaustion. An old monk wearing a bamboo hat and holding a monk's staff walked down from the carriage. When his right foot landed on the ground, the carriage made of stainless steel bounced half a foot off the ground. The old monk held a monk's staff and walked slowly towards the White Tower at the back of the temple, accompanied by dozens of ascetic monks. The White Tower Temple was filled with people. They looked at the scene curiously and bowed politely. They guessed the identity of the old monk and gradually, a piece of news spread among the crowd. Yueluan Kingdom was a Buddhist country and the people of Chaoyang City were all believers of the Buddhist sect. When they suddenly knew that the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple, a living Buddha, had come to the human world, they could not help but be shocked speechless. They all made way and knelt on both sides. They kowtowed excitedly and looked very pious. After a while, the ground was covered with blood stains. Wherever the old monk walked slowly, the crowd gradually parted like waves, revealing the sand at the bottom of the sea. The wind came from the lake, and the old monk's kasaya danced in the wind, as if he was walking in the middle of the sea. At the other end of the crowd, Ning Kei held a knife and killed people. He also forcibly carved out a bloody path in the crowd. The two paths with different meanings extended opposite each other and finally met. The two paths finally met and the crowd was divided into two sides. The middle was connected and they looked at each other. The old monk saw the young man bathed in blood, the daughter of Yama on his back and him drawing the bow. Ning Kei looked at the old monk in the kasaya and saw the monk's staff in his hand. The old monk looked at him and smiled. He slowly put down the monk's staff. Ning Kei's fingers loosened slightly and the bowstring bounced back. After killing Kunimati, Ning Kei knew that he could not avoid the strong aura. So he reached behind him, not to comfort Sang Sang, but to take the iron bow from her. When the crowd gradually parted, he had already drawn the iron bow and kept aiming in that direction with the arrowhead. Ning Kei's hand was very steady, just like his state of mind. He knew that he was facing the most powerful enemy he had ever met in his life. So he did not hesitate, nor did he hope to use any tactics. He used his most powerful weapon right away. With a buzz, the bowstring vibrated violently. A white turbulence appeared at the end of the iron arrow, and then suddenly disappeared. The next moment, the iron arrow was dozens of feet away, in front of the old monk. Ning Kei did not say a word, nor did his expression change. He did not ask who the other party was, or why he was here. He did not plead for mercy, nor did he shout angrily. He did not mention the academy, Taoism, or Buddhism. No matter who he was, he would shoot him first. The tens of thousands of people in the White Tower Temple, the ascetic monks from the Xiankong Temple, the people from the West Hill Divine Palace, and the officials of the Ueluan Kingdom did not expect the battle to start so suddenly. Because it was so sudden, it was chilling. Ning Kei keenly noticed that when he released the bowstring, the old monk wearing the bamboo hat still did not react. He could not help but feel a little confused. No matter how powerful a cultivator was, they would not dare to ignore the primordial 13 arrows, which were the combination of the Academy's wisdom and the Tang Empire's resources. In past battles, the powerhouses who had received Ning Kei's iron arrows had only vaguely sensed the ominous signs before Ning Kei shot the arrow and had to respond in advance. Regardless of whether it was Yi Hongyu's clever calculations, Long Qing's black natal peach, or Luo Kadi's collapsing mountain, they all did the same. Because this was the only way to defeat the absolute speed represented by the primordial 13 arrows. However, the old monk did not do anything. Ning Kei was slightly excited because he believed that even the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, could not stand still and let him shoot an arrow. Even eldest brother had to move in advance. However, he was slightly cautious because he believed that this old monk was definitely the most powerful enemy he had ever met. How could he not do anything and let himself be shot to death? The excitement and vigilance turned into uneasiness and finally into confusion. No matter what kind of emotion it was actually only a matter of a moment. It was much shorter than the moment mentioned by the Buddhism sect. In that extremely short period of time, what happened left Ning Kei with only one emotion left in his mind. That was shock, extreme shock. Other than shock, there were no other thoughts. With a swoosh, the iron arrow shot into the old monk's heart. The sharp arrowhead did not enter the old monk's body. It was as if the iron arrow had hit a steel plate. Then, the hard body of the arrow suddenly bent. There was a dull sound of impact. The strong wind blew in all directions and the old monk's kasaya danced in the wind. The iron arrow that had shot into his chest fell like a piece of straw trying to pierce through ice. It fell in front of the old monk's feet and made a crisp sound. The old monk's kasaya no longer danced in the wind. A piece of cloth fell from the old monk's chest. It looked like a withered leaf. This was all the damage that the primordial 13 arrows could cause. The primordial 13 arrows were powerful enough to break mountains and stones. Even if it shot a real steel plate, it could easily pierce through it. However, at this moment, it could not pierce through the old monk's body. Looking at this unbelievable scene, Ning Kei's left hand that was holding the iron bow trembled slightly. When he was fleeing to the west gate with Sang Sang on his back, he had already vaguely guessed who it was when he sensed the strong aura. However, he did not want his speculation to shake his fighting spirit. Therefore, when the crowd gradually dispersed and he saw the old monk, he shot the primordial 13 arrows. However, the final result proved that no matter how strong his fighting spirit was, no matter how decisive he was, and no matter how much he did not think about the identity of the other party, it was all meaningless in the face of the absolute difference in strength. Everyone in the White Tower Temple had already knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the old monk. In the hearts of the Yueluan people, this old monk was Buddha. The scene of the old monk taking the arrow with his body made them even more awestruck and excited. Ning Kei looked at the old monk and kept silent for a long time. Then he said in a slightly hoarse voice, "The Xiankong Temple is an unknown place, and the chief preaching monk is the current Buddha. I really did not expect that you would step into the mortal world." The chief preaching monk of the Xiankong Temple was naturally the most powerful person in the Buddhism sect. His status in the cultivation world was similar to that of the abbey dean of the Jishou Abbey and the headmaster of the academy. Ning Kei could not deal with such a person personally. The chief preaching monk looked at Sang Sang on Ning Kei's back and said slowly, "The daughter of Yama has appeared in the human world. How can I not come? But you, why don't you leave?" Ning Kei fell silent again and then said, "Why should I leave?" The chief preaching monk looked at the ground full of corpses and endless blood behind Ning Kei and asked with a slightly pitiful expression, "The world is innocent. Why should they suffer so much? Your actions are fruitless. Why are you so cruel?" Ning Kei looked at the terrible old monk and suppressed the fear in his heart with a very strong will. He said, "Master, you are wrong. I am not cruel enough. Otherwise, I would have found my own cause and effect. When I killed people, I killed the old and the women, but I hesitated when I killed the children. Otherwise, I would have left by now." The chief preaching monk sighed and said, "It is said that you have joined the devil. Now it seems that not only your cultivation, but your heart has also joined the devil. In that case, I will send you back. The next chapter will be written later because I am tired now. I am afraid that there will be problems with what I write. So write slowly and carefully. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 637. Ning Kei had confirmed two important facts from these two simple sentences. The old monk with an unfathomable state was indeed the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple, and the old monk was about to kill him and Sang Sang. In the face of such a serious situation, he had no time to think about the power gap between him and the chief preaching monk. He didn't even think about it. With what little courage and determination he had left, he launched an attack. The great spirit in his body gushed out, and his right foot stepped on the hard ground, leaving a stone pit. His body turned into a shadow and instantly rushed to the front of the chief preaching monk. He raised the padao with both hands and chopped at the chief preaching monk's head with the blazing Haotian divine flame, as if he was going to incinerate all the dark clouds in the sky. The hard and heavy padao fiercely chopped the bamboo hat on the chief preaching monk's head, making a loud buzzing sound. It was like chopping an ancient bell, and a melodious bell reverberated. The bamboo hat was instantly smashed into dust, splashing everywhere. The chief preaching monk's bald head could be vaguely seen. However, the chief preaching monk's expression didn't change, and even his silver-white eyebrows didn't tremble at all. Ning Kei's hands holding the hilt trembled again, but his movements didn't slow down at all. With a loud shout, the padao chopped down again with Haotian divine flame. It fell like a storm, and in a flash, it chopped the chief preaching monk 17 times. Each time it fell on a different position, but it was all so fierce and tough. The first stroke that burned the sky and broke the mountain was the most powerful one Ning Ke had ever used in his life. It was many times more powerful than the one he used to blind Lu Yiqing at the side gate of the academy. At this time, he chopped 17 times in a row, which was the most exquisite bladesmanship he could perform. If not for the strong fear, he wouldn't be able to perform it at his current state. However, whether it was the most powerful stroke or the most exquisite bladesmanship, they all lost their meaning in the face of this silent and calm old monk. How could he hurt someone if he couldn't even cut off an eyebrow? When the padao ended, the bamboo hat on the chief preaching monk was still splashing around. His kasaya was cut into countless pieces by the blade, but it didn't have time to fall. Like a ghost, Ning Ke retreated dozens of feet and returned to his previous position. His face was pale. Another breeze came from the lake. The robe on the chief monk of scripture slowly floated up like a butterfly, revealing his naked body. Then, a disciple helped him change into new clothes. At this time, the tens of thousands of believers in the temple were kneeling on the ground and kowtowing piously. No one noticed this scene. But Ning Ke could see clearly that there was not even a trace of a knife wound on the old body of the chief preaching monk. He could not help but feel a chill in his body and mind. He thought of what Chi Mei had said in front of the small courtyard. There are thousands of Buddhist teachings in the Buddhist sect, but they don't deviate from the main principle. What we cultivate is to enter Buddhism through meditation and become a Buddha through the body. Both our bodies and minds are indestructible, and I have already cultivated to become a Buddha through the body. After the battle in the small courtyard, Ning Ke was very clear about the strength and terrifying recovery ability of Chi Mei's body. He was just a disciple of the chief preaching monk and had only cultivated his body to the level of Buddha. The chief preaching monk of the Xiankong temple could not be pierced by the primordial 13 arrows, nor could the padao with Haotian divine light leave a mark on him. Obviously, he had reached the supreme state of Buddhism where his body and mind were both indestructible. What was indestructible? It was indestructible no matter how hard he was hit. Then how could he fight this battle? Ning Ke never knew how to write the word despair, but today he seemed to finally understand the strokes of this word. The chief preaching monk changed into a new kasaya and then raised his head. He looked at Ning Ke, who was dozens of feet away, with a calm expression and slowly put down the staff in his hand. Previously, the staff in his hand had been falling, but Ning Ke's movements were too fast and his movements were too slow. Therefore, the staff had not fallen to the ground even after Ning Ke had slashed 18 times. Until then, the tip of the staff finally touched the ground. The tip of the staff made a clear sound like a bell. The tip of the staff pierced into the ground easily and silently. There was no deafening sound, and there was no momentum that shook the world. Tens of thousands of Yueluan citizens who were bowing to the ground felt nothing. The incomparably berserk voice was silent. It was so violent that it could not be felt. Only Ning Ke felt the tremor, the vibration of the earth. Ning Ke's feet trembled, and his broken boots were all broken into pieces. The trembling spread to his legs, and his pants were instantly torn. Then, his body also trembled. Then, Sang on his back also trembled. There were two puffs. Ning Ke spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground in front of him. Sang spat out a mouthful of blood on his shoulder. The chief preaching monk lifted the staff again and slowly walked toward Ningquebec. Ning Ke was extremely disappointed. His only thought was to jump into the lake in the back temple with Sang on his back. However, he felt that all his bones had been broken, and he did not have the strength to escape. The chief preaching monk walked very slowly. He needed to use the staff to support himself with each step and take a temporary rest. Every time the staff fell to the ground, the tip of the staff would make a clear and pleasant sound. Ning Ke, who was dozens of feet away, would feel a violent impact again, as if the staff had fallen on his heart. The chief preaching monk walked toward Ning Ke step by step. Ning Ke and Sang Sang kept vomiting blood as they watched the chief preaching monk walking toward them. At this moment, he would rather the chief preaching monk move faster. Because the slower the chief preaching monk was, the more painful it would be for him and Sang Sang. More than 100 Buddhist monks occupied the temple. Hundreds of archers from the Yueluan army woke up from the previous shock and fanaticism. They pulled their bows and arrows and aimed at Ning Quebec. Only Master Chi Mei, for some reason, was still standing outside the crowd. Ning Ke tried to pull the iron bow, but found that he could not do anything in front of the chief preaching monk's power and within the range of the sound of the staff. The chief preaching monk walked toward him slowly and asked indifferently, "Where is the chessboard left by Buddha?" Ning Ke smiled painfully and his teeth were full of blood. He said, "In the depths of my mind. You can kill me and see which part of my mind is hidden." The chief monk of scripture sighed and looked at Song Song's pale face. He said with pity, "Poor child, you've wasted your time in the human world. You've suffered for so many years. Today you're free." Ning Ke coughed up blood and squeezed out a mocking expression. He said, "Buddha said to deliver all living beings from suffering. So this is the way to be free. Why don't you free yourself first?" He was still in the mood to mock the chief preaching monk when the situation was critical and desperate. He thought that it was worth it to laugh at a bigwig like the chief preaching monk before he died. And he did not despair. The reason why he did not despair was that he still had a glimmer of hope. That hope did not lie in him. It lied in the person he was waiting for. He had waited for that person for a long time in the Lank Temple. After leaving the Lank Temple, he waited for that person in Chaoyang City for a whole winter. He had been waiting for that person because he firmly believed that that person would come. That person came that day in the Lank Temple. So he should appear in the White Tower Temple today. However, would that person really come? A thump. The answer to Ning Ke's question was the sound of a zither. The zither was a kind of musical instrument that made sounds with strings. It was usually 7-stringed. The sound was gentle and the most elegant. This was the White Tower Temple. The ground was covered with corpses and endless blood. It was the Azura realm that the Buddhism sect talked about. The sound of the zither was not harmonious with this place. And there was no zither in the White Tower Temple. No one here had a zither. But there was a string. Although it was only one string, when it was taut, if someone plucked it with their fingers, it could also make a clear and pleasant sound. The strings were on the bows held by hundreds of archers from the Yueluan kingdom. The sound of the zither came from a bow. However, the person playing the zither was obviously in a hurry. When he plucked the string, he used too much force and broke the taut string. The string suddenly broke into two and turned into a gray rope. Then, the sound of the zither sounded again. There were hundreds of archers from the Yueluan kingdom, so there were hundreds of bows. There were hundreds of bows, so there were hundreds of taut strings. When the zither player touched the bowstring, there would be a sound, and then the string would break. The clear sound of the zither was dense and continuous in the White Tower Temple. It was like a group of pearls falling on a jade plate or a shower falling into an iron urn. There was no interruption, but it seemed to sound at the same time. Thump, 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 thump. It seemed to be a long time, but it was only a very short moment. The dense and clear sound of the zither rose and then disappeared at the same time. Only some lingering sound was left, echoing in the White Tower Temple. A scholar in an old cotton-padded jacket came to the scene. He stood quietly in front of Ning Ke and looked at the chief preaching monk not far away. The wooden dipper tied to his belt swayed gently. The sound of the zither stopped. The 100 strings broke. The monk's staff in the hands of the chief preaching monk no longer made a clear sound. After the scholar appeared, the scene was quiet. The wind rose again, and the new kasaya on the chief preaching monk slowly danced. But no one knew whether the wind came from the lake or from the scholar. It was only then that the archers realized that the bows in their hands had become useless. The arrows on the strings had long been shot into the air, and no one knew where they had gone. They looked at the scholar in shock. They vaguely guessed that it had something to do with this person, but they could not figure out how it happened. They were even more confused about who this person was. Of course Ning Ke knew who he was, because he was the person he had been waiting for. He had thought that he would never see him again, but he still appeared. Looking at the scholar, his nerves, which had been tense for countless days and nights, suddenly relaxed. He felt endless exhaustion pouring into his body. From the autumn in the Lank Temple to the autumn in the wilderness, and then to the winter in Chaoyang City, he had always been on the run without help. It was not until now that he finally had someone he could rely on. It was a good feeling. Eldest brother turned around and saw Ning Ke covered in blood. He could not help but feel a little guilty, a little ashamed, and also very gratified. He said in a trembling voice, "Younger brother, I'm here." Ning Ke looked at eldest brother covered in dust and his haggard and tired appearance. He understood why and was extremely moved. He said in a trembling voice, "Senior brother, you're here?" These two sentences sounded almost at the same time. The two of them looked at each other in a daze. They looked at each other, smiled, and then began to cough together. I feel like Ning Ke at this moment when I saw eldest brother. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 638. Ning Ke coughed because he was injured, but he did not understand why eldest brother was also coughing. Looking at eldest brother's haggard appearance, Ning Ke could not help but worry if he was also injured. However, the situation was still tense. Even if eldest brother came, he might not be able to defeat the chief preaching monk who had entered the Vajra realm. He asked directly, "Eldest brother, can you take us away from here? Just like when you came here." Eldest brother shook his head. "One will do." Ning Ke still did not give up and looked back at Sang Sang. Eldest brother said embarrassedly, "My state is not high and the number of times I can use it is limited. I really can't take you away, and my state has been a little unstable recently." Modesty is arrogance. If eldest brother's state is not high, who is? Ning Ke said. Then he thought of eldest brother who had been coughing and said that his state was showing signs of instability. Ning Ke could not help but worry and asked, "Senior brother, what's wrong with your state?" Eldest brother answered honestly, "I have been traveling around the world for the past year. One reason is that I have no time to cultivate and strengthen my heart, but the most important reason is that I am a little tired." A little tired. It was a simple answer. However, what kind of exhaustion could make a peerless powerhouse above the 5 states show signs of instability? Ning Ke looked at eldest brother's haggard face, and was so moved that he did not know what to say. At this moment, the chief preaching monk finally spoke. "Mr. First really wants to save the daughter of Yama? The catastrophe is gradually unfolding. Can you really bear to see the common people in the world die like these people today?" Eldest brother looked at the corpses of the people lying in pools of blood. He looked at the broken limbs and the spilled intestines on the ground. He felt the sticky blood on the soles of his shoes. His face turned pale and his eyes revealed a gloomy expression. His eyes were just like him. No matter how bloody and dirty the world was reflected in them, they were still so clean. Because of this, they were so sad. Ning Ke knew how kind and gentle eldest brother was. Seeing the sadness on his face, he somehow felt a little flustered and did not dare to look at his eyes. Eldest brother did not hide his emotions. He did not know how to hide them either. After a long time of sadness, he gradually calmed down. Then he looked at the chief monk and said slowly, "Teacher asked me to bring you a message." After a moment of silence, the chief preaching monk gently flicked his sleeves. A faintly discernible Buddhist aura emanated from his fingers and enveloped the passage in the crowd, isolating it from the outside. In the autumn of the 16th year of the Tianqi era, I went to the Xiankong temple, but you refused to meet me. This autumn, I also went to Xiankong Temple, but you still avoided me. Since we meet today, I can finally let you hear these words. The eldest brother looked at the chief monk of scripture and said calmly, "Neither the everlasting night nor the Dharma-ending age mentioned by the Buddhism sect is the future we want to see. The Academy will not watch the underworld invasion without doing anything. But the headmaster thinks that we don't have to kill the daughter of Yama to avoid the underworld invasion." The chief monk of scripture said expressionlessly, "Buddha once said his last words. Everything that has happened in the past 2 years has been confirmed. The cold aura in the daughter of Yama is the brand that Yama left on her. Once she wakes up, Yama can come to the underworld. How can we not kill her?" The eldest brother said, "The headmaster has never believed in the existence of the underworld because he has not found it. Even if Yama does exist, the headmaster does not believe that he will keep traveling among the 70,000 worlds to find it." The chief monk of scripture frowned slightly and asked, "Why does the headmaster say so?" The eldest brother said, "Because the headmaster thinks that the evolution of life always tends to the improvement of wisdom and knowledge. Correspondingly, it is a process of gradually abandoning the body. In the headmaster's words, the higher the level of life, the lazier it is. The laziness here does not refer to ordinary laziness, but to the existence of wisdom like Yama. It is impossible to find the human world in such a laborious way." The chief monk of scripture's silver eyebrows fluttered slowly, and he said in a low voice, "But this is the future that Buddha saw." The eldest brother looked at his face and said calmly, "The headmaster said that what Buddha said is not necessarily right." The chief monk of scripture said expressionlessly, "Buddha once said that, but the headmaster said nothing." At this time, there were tens of thousands of people in the White Tower Temple, and the passage in the crowd was blocked by the aura of Buddhism. Except for a few people standing in the passage, no one could hear this conversation. Master Chi Mei, who was standing behind the chief monk of scripture, heard it. Ning Kei and Sang Sang, who were standing behind the eldest brother, also heard it. But they heard it and there was no other meaning. Because with their current state, they could not understand this conversation in such a short time. But the next sentence that the headmaster of scripture said was very simple and easy to understand. So Master Chi Mei looked slightly serious and thoughtful. Ning Kei's expression did not change, but his heart was in turmoil. The headmaster said that if the cold aura in Sang Sang's body is the imprint left by Yama, and once it is released, Yama can sense the coordinates of the human world. Then, logically speaking, there is no reason for Yama to let Sang Sang grow in the human world for so many years before she starts to wake up. The eldest brother looked at the chief monk's eyes and said, "A more likely speculation is that Yama did not expect Sang Sang to hide her identity forever in the world of Haotian and have the opportunity to grow up and wake up. Instead, from the beginning, Yama knew that Sang Sang would die, and even waited for her to die. Why? Because as long as Sang Sang dies, the imprint sealed in her body will be released automatically, and then the location of the human world will be exposed. So what we have to do is not to kill her, but to protect her." It was quiet in the Buddhist temple, and the lake in front of the White Tower was gently rippling. The 5 people in the crowd, but in a different world from the crowd, fell into a long silence at the same time. After the identity of the daughter of Yama was revealed, Sang Sang began to face the pursuit of the 2 sects of Buddhism and Taoism, and even the whole world. Everyone thought that as long as they could kill her, the imprint left by Yama would disappear, and the human world could avoid Yama's eyes forever. But no one had ever thought that although Yama had 70,000 children, how could he not notice the death of one of his daughters? This did not mean that the bigwigs of the 2 sects of Buddhism and Taoism were stupid, but because of the deep-rooted inertia of thinking, the Buddhist monk's supreme belief in the Buddha's last words, the Haotian disciples' absolute belief in Haotian's oracle, and the cold fear of the underworld invasion, they could not think of other possibilities. In the eyes of the headmaster of Academy, Buddha was a peer, and Haotian was an otherworldly thing, which could not affect him at all. He did not have any inertia of thinking, so he could think of this possibility. I'm really going to curse. I'm so tired. I'm so bitter. No matter how I write, I can't write right. I deleted, wrote, and deleted. I even disconnected from the internet and wrote for an entire night. Fortunately, it's out. I don't care anymore. I'll continue writing. I don't believe that I can't finish it. The next chapter will be out before 3:00. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 639. Time passed slowly. Because of the silence, it seemed that nothing had passed. The clear light on the white tower slowly changed, and the willow branches by the lake seemed to be sprouting. No one spoke. Ning-Ke looked at the chief preaching monk, his right hand holding the hilt slightly trembling. It was not fear, nor was it accumulating killing intent. He was waiting for the chief preaching monk's answer anxiously. If the chief preaching monk agreed with the headmaster, the Buddhism sect would not continue to chase after Sangsang. Instead, they would be responsible for Sangsang's safety. After countless days and nights of escape, he finally saw a glimmer of light. He was a little uneasy, but full of confidence because he believed that the headmaster's inference was correct. In his mind, the headmaster was always right and could not be wrong. However, it was a pity that Ning-Ke forgot one thing. The headmaster had a higher position than Haotian and the Buddha in the hearts of the academy disciples. But in the eyes of the Buddhism sect disciples, especially bigwigs like the chief preaching monk, the headmaster could not be higher than the Buddha and Haotian. The chief preaching monk pondered for a long time, and then gently shook the monk's staff in his hand. The staff head rang crisply. He looked at the eldest brother and said, "The Buddha may not be right, and the headmaster may not be right either. One is wrong, and the other is wrong. As a disciple of the Buddhism sect, we must learn to listen to the Buddha. When there is a right or wrong, we should not choose right or wrong." The eldest brother understood the chief preaching monk's meaning and looked a little sad. He sighed and said, "The headmaster is right. It is always the most difficult thing to change others' views." The chief preaching monk's silver eyebrows slightly fluttered. He suddenly said, "But," the eldest brother was a little startled, and then he looked happy. Ning-Ke was disappointed, but when he heard the word, "but," his dim eyes suddenly brightened. He asked, "But what?" The chief preaching monk raised his left arm and pointed to the white tower in the middle of the lake. He said slowly, "This white tower is also a relic of the Buddha. It can suppress all evil spirits and isolate the world. The disciples of the Buddhism sect have been studying the Buddhist scriptures for many generations. They have not let the chessboard and bell disappear. But they still do not understand why the Buddha left this tower in the human world. Now, hearing the headmaster's words, I suddenly think that the Buddha left this tower because he wanted to see what would happen today." The eldest brother said, "You mean you want Sangsang to live in the White Tower?" The chief preaching monk nodded and said, "Exactly." The eldest brother frowned slightly and said, "I don't think the white pagoda left by Buddha is that simple." The chief monk of scripture looked at him and said calmly, "The White Tower can only be opened once every 10,000 years." Eldest brother looked back at Sangsang on Ning-Ke's back. He looked at the little girl's pale and haggard face. After a long silence he said softly, "What's the difference between that and killing her?" He looked at Sangsang with a complicated expression. There was some pity in his eyes, but also vigilance and uneasiness. Ning-Ke saw the look in eldest brother's eyes and felt a little bitter. He thought that even the headmaster would find it hard to accept that Sangsang had become the daughter of Yama. However, he was satisfied that the academy had treated him so well. Eldest brother looked at Ning-Ke again. He saw the blood on his face, the sadness in his eyes, and his tiredness. After a moment of silence, he said to the chief preaching monk, "The headmaster wants to bring her back to the academy." The chief preaching monk shook his head calmly. Eldest brother coughed again and his body trembled slightly. He seemed to be in great pain. After a long time, he gradually calmed down and said, "In that case, let's see if we can leave." Master Chi Mei's body shook when he heard this. Ning Ke was slightly stunned and Sang Sang showed a sad expression. She really didn't want these things to happen because of her. The negotiation between the Academy and the Buddhism sect officially broke down. Eldest brother looked back at Ning Ke and patted him on the shoulder. He said, "Don't worry about anything. I will take you away and we will go back to the Academy together." Ning Ke's mood was a little strange at this time. He lowered his head and kept silent for a long time. Then he said, "I understand. If I ask for your help, senior brother, you will definitely help me and Sang Sang fight our way out. Even if we fail in the end, we will all die and you will die before me. I am very sure of this, even if sometimes I can't understand this conviction. Senior brother, you have always been wary of Sang Sang. You may even be the first person to find out that Sang Sang is the daughter of Yama. But now that Sang Sang's identity has been exposed, why do you still do this?" Eldest brother smiled and said matter-of-factly, "Because I am your senior brother." Ning Ke looked at the sea of people in the White Tower Temple and said, "But these people will not let us leave." Eldest brother understood what he meant. After a moment of silence, he said, "If you are forced to do evil, as your senior brother, it should be my business, not your business." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Even if we kill thousands of people today, what should we do after we return to the Academy? What if all the countries in the world attack the Tang Empire? What if the people of Chang'an, like those in Chaoyang City, rush into the Academy and ask the teacher to hand over Sang Sang? Are we going to kill all of them?" Eldest brother was slightly stunned. He had never thought about these problems, or he didn't want to think about these problems. Ning Ke looked at the different expressions in the crowd and thought of those who had fallen under his blade. Then he saw the little boy who had hit Sang Sang with a stone and was still crying in the crowd. "Senior brother, have you ever fought?" he suddenly asked. Eldest brother shook his head. Ning Ke looked at him and asked with a smile, "Senior brother, have you ever killed anyone?" Eldest brother continued to shake his head. Ning Ke continued to smile. Because he had finally made a difficult decision, he felt relaxed and his smile became brighter. "I have asked Pippi these 2 questions before. 12th brother has at least fought, which is better than you. By the way, senior brother, how is Pippi now?" Eldest brother said, "Pippi has returned to the abbey." Ning Ke sighed and said, "He has finally grown up. It seems that love really needs courage." Eldest brother did not understand why he said this and faintly felt a little uneasy. Ning Ke looked at him and said, "Senior brother, I also have courage." He continued, "I did not know how to write the word trust since I was a child until I entered the Academy. I believed that the Academy could protect me and Sang Sang. So whether in the Lank Temple, in the wilderness, or just now, I have been waiting for you to appear. But was it trust or use? I believed that you would come to save me, so I have been waiting for you to help me out. It seemed to be trust, but in fact, it was just use. Because I never thought about and didn't care what price you and the Academy would pay in the process of saving me. And I clearly knew that even if you knew that I didn't care, you didn't care. So I always believed that you would come." Ning Ke no longer looked at eldest brother. He reached out to take the straw rope from Sang Sang and went around the hilt and the right hand holding the hilt. He said, "Until I saw your eyes just now, I was a little regretful." The straw rope was wrapped tighter and tighter around the hilt and the right hand. He looked at the bloodstains in his palm and said, "Senior brother, you must be very painful to see me kill so many innocent people, right? Of course, you will continue to help me, because as you said just now, you are my senior brother." When the last straw rope was around, Ning Ke raised his right hand and handed it to Sang Sang for her to tie it. Then he looked at eldest brother and said, "If it was in the past, I would probably continue to use you with a clear conscience, just like what Qin Yan did. As the saying goes, a gentleman can be deceived with methods. But I don't want to do that anymore. Eldest brother looked at his eyes and asked confusedly, "Why do you suddenly not want to do that?" Of course it's not because of a sudden enlightenment, nor is it because of the sublimation of human nature. I still think that you are too gentle and kind, unlike second brother who is straightforward. Ning Ke stopped smiling and said, "It's rare to see such a clean person like you in the world. I can't bear to see your hands stained with stinky human blood. If you want to take me back to the academy, you will inevitably be stained with blood. Once that happens, you will never be able to rest in peace for the rest of your life. I am different from you. No matter how many people I kill, I can rest in peace. If someone wants to kill my wife, I will kill them. This is the principle of the academy. But if you can't rest in peace, I can't rest in peace." The heavy padao hung on his wrist and kept swinging, giving off the smell of blood. He looked at eldest brother and said, "I have been killing people since I was a child. My hands are stained with the blood of innocent people. Why should I dirty your hands? Since there is blood, let's continue." He had been talking all the time, while eldest brother remained silent. His dusty face looked a little confused, and then gradually became uneasy. He said, "Youngest brother, what are you trying to say?" "Eldest brother, let's go separately," Ning Ke said. Eldest brother found it hard to understand. He slowly frowned and thought for a while before saying, "Since you have been waiting for me and I have been looking for you, why do we have to separate now that we have met again?" Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, "Because I suddenly understand that you have been looking for me to take me back to the academy. And I have been waiting for you just to wait for you. Eldest brother, I am very grateful for your appearance, because it is very important to me." After saying this, he knelt in front of eldest brother and bowed. "Because we meet, we can separate. So meeting is to separate." Eldest brother finally understood what he meant. He also knelt in front of him and bowed back. He sighed and said, "Thank you for treating me as your eldest brother from now on." Ning Ke bowed again and said, "Eldest brother, you have worked hard for more than a year." Eldest brother bowed back and said, "I am useless and cannot take you away. Don't blame me." Ning Ke bowed again without saying anything. Eldest brother bowed again and said, "Even if we have to separate, I will send you to the Great Way." In my detailed outline, this chapter should have been a very important point, involving Ning Ke's changes. But I am in a bad state today and my brain is not working well. It is said that an author should not say that his writing is not good. But I really don't know how well I have written this chapter. Can I write what I want and let you see it? Of course, I believe in your sharp eyes. There are only 2 chapters today and I really can't write anymore. If I can recover tomorrow, I will write 4 chapters. If not, I will not open a single chapter for monthly votes. Of course, I am too embarrassed to open a single chapter today. Good night, everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 640. I was in a very bad state yesterday. I even wrote the wrong names of 2 chapters. You can imagine my mental state at that time. But I still tried hard to write. I didn't expect the second chapter to get so many good comments. That chapter is very important to me, so I'm very happy. Thank you for your likes. I'm in a better state today. This is the first chapter. The people in the White Tower Temple would not let Ning Ke and Sang Sang leave. The crowd that had been frightened by his bloody means and gradually dispersed gradually gained courage and strength with the arrival of the chief preaching monk. The chief preaching monk himself was the biggest obstacle for Ning Ke and Sang Sang to leave. Eldest brother helped Ning Ke up and took out several iron arrows from somewhere. He handed them to Ning Ke and said, "These are the iron arrows you lost in the Hua Mountain." Sixth brother repaired them. "If you can escape, deal with the talisman lines." These iron cylinders were also made by sixth brother. He asked me to bring them to you. Ning Ke took the heavy iron arrows and put them into the arrow box. He tightened one of the small iron cylinders on the arrowhead of an iron arrow and said, "Sang Sang and I will leave by ourselves. Senior brother, you don't have to see us off." Eldest brother looked at the dense crowd in the lakeside temple and the chief preaching monk not far away. He said, "If you can leave by yourself, why did you wait for me?" Ning Ke looked at the tiredness between eldest brother's eyebrows and felt very uneasy. In his opinion, even if eldest brother had broken through the 5 states and entered the limitless state, he still had no chance of winning against the chief preaching monk who had entered the Vajra body. Eldest brother knew what he was worried about. He looked at him and said gently, "Indeed, not many people can defeat the chief preaching monk. But at least I can stop him." Then he continued, "The only weakness of the Master's Dharma is that he is too slow. And according to the promise, he can't attack. So I'm confident that I can send you away." They did not deliberately lower their voices when they talked, because no matter how low their voices were, they could not hide from the chief preaching monk's hearing. The chief monk of scripture sat cross-legged on the ground, holding the middle part of the staff in his right hand. He looked calm and natural, as if he didn't hear what they were saying, or if he heard it, he didn't care. Ning Ke looked at the expression of the powerhouse from the Buddhism sect and the uneasiness in his heart grew. He had a feeling that if eldest brother attacked, they would be in deep trouble. He reached out to grab eldest brother's sleeve. However, when his fingertips should have touched eldest senior brother's cotton sleeve, he found that he only grabbed a gust of wind. A light breeze blew, and the cotton robe on eldest brother's body fluttered. Then, his body suddenly turned illusory and disappeared into thin air. No one knew where he went, but only a word was left echoing in eldest brother's ears. "Let's go." Ning Ke knew that this was not the time to say goodbye. Since eldest brother had already taken action, he had to take advantage of this opportunity to escape. Otherwise, he would miss eldest brother's arrangement. Even if eldest brother could hold off the chief monk of scripture for a while, the crowd in the White Tower Temple, especially Master Chi Mei, the powerhouses from the Buddhism sect, and the powerhouses from the West Hill Divine Palace from Hautian Taoism, could make him and Sang Sang stay. Therefore, he carried Sang Sang on his back and ran without hesitation to the quiet lake under the White Tower. However, the next moment, his feet suddenly sank and fell heavily on the ground. He could not lift his feet again. The escape that had just started came to an abrupt end. It was not because the powerhouses from the Buddhism sect and Taoism sect blocked his way, nor was it because the crowd madly pounced on them again. It was because he sensed the strange fluctuation of heaven and earth around him and saw the horrified expressions on some people's faces. He guessed that something very shocking had happened behind him. Ning Ke suddenly turned around and looked at the chief monk of scripture, who was sitting cross-legged. Eldest brother suddenly disappeared and entered the limitless state. His target was naturally the chief monk of scripture. The limitless state was one of the most magical cultivation methods in the world. It was an amazing divine sense above the 5 states. It was like riding the wind or riding the clouds. It could cross mountains and pass through countries in a flash. There was no body movement in the world that could be faster than the limitless state, not even the sage of Sword Lu Bai's thousands of miles sword. According to Ning Ke's calculation, when eldest brother disappeared and reappeared in front of the crowd, he must be in front of the chief monk of scripture. He might even have gone thousands of miles away to take some powerful weapon and then return to the White Tower Temple to attack the chief monk of scripture. At this moment, eldest brother had reappeared in front of the crowd. But he was not in front of the chief monk of scripture. He was still far away from the chief monk of scripture. It was as if he was forced to show his figure the moment he took a step forward. Looking at the chief monk of scripture, who was sitting cross-legged more than 100 feet away, eldest brother's cotton-padded robe trembled slightly. The dust slowly floated up. His expression was unusually solemn and his body was unusually heavy, as if he could not take another step forward. If one looked carefully, one could even see that the straw sandals on his feet did not step firmly on the ground. They were about half an inch away from the soil, but he could not move an inch. At this moment, the sound of scripture chanting slowly rang out. The chief monk of scripture sat cross-legged with his hand holding a monk's staff. He looked solemn and his voice was like the sound of Buddha. As I have heard, the three realms are all impermanent. There is nothing and there is joy. There is Tao in nature. Everything is empty. There is no wind and there is no dew. There is no fog and there is no lightning. Observe in silence from the body. This Buddhist scripture came from the Great Mercy Scroll. This Buddhist scripture was talking about eldest brother. As the sound of Buddha rang out, the surrounding environment suddenly changed strangely. The lake no longer rippled, the willows on the shore drooped down powerlessly, and even the ever-changing light on the White Tower seemed to freeze. There was no wind at all. There was silence in the White Tower temple. Everyone in the lake, the tower, and the temple were at peace. Everything in the world returned to the original state thousands of years ago with the sound of Buddha. It was so peaceful that it made people's hearts palpitate. In this absolutely peaceful world, how could one walk with the wind without wind? How could one fly by stepping on dew without dew? How could one pass through fog without fog? How could one move like lightning without lightning? Eldest brother's body was forced to hover in this peaceful world. His feet did not touch the ground and he slowly landed. His cotton clothes gradually stopped trembling, and his face became paler and paler. It was said that speed was the only unbreakable law in the world. However, the fastest distanceless state was broken today. Ning Ke only had time to turn around and take a step back. He noticed something strange, so he stopped and turned around. He heard the chanting and saw that eldest brother was in danger. He was so shocked that he did not have time to think about how eldest brother's distanceless state could be broken. He pulled the iron bow like lightning and shot an arrow at the chief monk of scripture's face. Before eldest brother appeared, he had already shot at the chief monk of scripture with the primordial 13 arrows. Facing the chief monk of scripture who was both physically and mentally invincible, the powerful iron arrow turned into a withered branch and did not have any effect. However, he still shot a second iron arrow because there was a small iron tube on the arrowhead. He did not believe that there was an immortal in the world. Even if the chief monk of scripture was invincible and could ignore any physical damage, he believed that the explosion of the small iron tube could at least disturb the powerhouse of the Buddhism sect, even if it could not burn him to death. Thus, eldest brother could get out of his current strange predicament. However, the next moment he saw a very strange scene. The iron arrow left the bowstring, and a white turbulence bloomed from the arrowhead's tail. It scattered like dandelions blown by the wind, and then slowly floated down. Ning Ke was very familiar with the shooting process of the primordial 13 arrows. He knew that the white turbulence was the result of the iron arrow's talisman intent and the natural wind. However, it was the first time he saw such a situation. The iron arrow, which was supposed to ignore the distance and fly away silently, did not disappear after leaving the bowstring. Instead, it maintained its original body and slowly flew for several feet before falling to the ground from the air. The iron arrow couldn't get close to the chief preaching monk at all. The iron cylinder on the arrowhead hit the ground with a dull sound. There wasn't even a flame, not to mention the powerful explosion that they had imagined. Ning Ke's face suddenly turned pale. His cheeks seemed to have become thinner, and his body trembled violently. Then, he stretched out his right index finger and drew a line in the air at the chief monk of scripture in the distance. It was as strong as an iron hook. This was the only indefinite divine talisman he knew, the two horizontal talisman. Ning Ke had been holding back his psyche power when they were on the verge of death with Sang Sang. He was worried that he would consume too much psyche power, so he did not use it. However, he would not hesitate when he saw eldest brother in danger. However, he found something very strange again. No matter how violently his psyche power gushed out, no matter how steadily and forcefully his fingertips drew in the air, he could not make the talisman lines in the air produce any talisman meaning. Moreover, he faintly had a more frightening speculation. Even if he could draw the divine talisman, he could not mobilize the chi of heaven and earth. As the scripture slowly came out from the chief monk of scripture, the chi of heaven and earth in the White Tower Temple was so quiet that it could not be mobilized, just like the natural things such as lakes, pagodas, people, wind, rain, and snow. As the scripture entered his ears, Ning Kei's sense of perception gradually became quiet. He did not want to mobilize any psyche power at all. His body gradually relaxed, and he only wanted to sit down and listen to the scripture. Even the great spirit in his body became much calmer, and the crystal liquid that kept spinning in his abdomen began to slow down. Ning Kei looked at the chief monk of scripture, who was sitting cross-legged and was shocked speechless. He wondered what kind of method it was that could affect his inner body and make him seem so powerful. Eldest brother looked at the chief monk of scripture and said in shock, "Words are the law. As I have heard, the three realms are all impermanent. There is nothing and there is joy. There is Tao in nature. Everything is empty. There is no wind or dew. There is no fog or lightning. Observe in silence, and it rises from the body." The scripture of the chief monk of scripture echoed in the White Tower Temple. It was as distant as the bell, as quiet as the wooden fish, as subtle as the incense burning, and as deep as the Buddha's voice. Everything was empty. There was no wind, dew, fog, lightning, rain, snow, and dew. In the early years of the human world, there was no aura of heaven and earth. Then how could one mobilize and control the aura of heaven and earth? The chief monk of scripture was the supreme figure in the Xiankong Temple. His disciples had a higher status than bigwigs, such as the chief monk of the Commandment Hall. The reason was that the Xiankong Temple was a place for Buddha to preach. The chief monk of scripture was above the five states. He had his own Buddha realm, so he was the Buddha in the human world. The scripture he preached in the human world was the Buddhist scripture, and the words he said were the words of Buddha. The words of Buddha were the rules of his world. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 641. There was no wind in the world, but the old cotton-padded robe fluttered. The eldest brother looked at the chief monk of scripture, who was sitting cross-legged with a pale face. He said with a confused expression, "Teacher said that you can't do anything." The chief preaching monk looked at him and said calmly, "Many years ago, I did make a promise to the headmaster that I wouldn't do anything unless it was the end of the world. However, the daughter of Yama came to the human world, which was the end of the world. Since then, I have been reading scriptures every night and finally mastered the Buddha's word. I didn't do anything, I just spoke." The eldest brother was startled and shook his head. Junmo is right. The chief preaching monk didn't understand what he meant. He put his palms together and continued chanting. Only Ning Kei and Chi Mei knew the words, "All monks should die." Chi Mei's expression changed slightly, but he didn't show any anger. He just kept silent. Ning Kei was angry, but he was also extremely frightened. The chief preaching monk's chanting could affect the aura of heaven and earth in such a large area around the White Tower Temple. He had created a world in the human world with the Buddha's words. The state he showed was too terrifying. Ning Kei had to admit that the old monk sitting cross-legged with his staff was the most powerful cultivator he had ever seen in his life. He was even stronger than the sword that Lu Bai had used to stab at the Lank Temple from beyond the sky. The chanting continued, the lake was still, and the tower light was condensed. The White Tower Temple seemed to have become a Buddhist country from the beginning of the world. The aura of heaven and earth became extremely peaceful, vaguely connected to a state above the 5 states of Taoism. However, it also had a strong sense of suppression. In such a world, cultivators couldn't control the qi of heaven and earth and were no different from ordinary people. Tens of thousands of Yueluan citizens didn't know what was happening in the Taoist field. They couldn't hear or see, and even if they did, they couldn't understand. They could only instinctively feel that something very solemn and profound was happening. So they bowed to the chief preaching monk again and didn't dare to get up. The aura of heaven and earth gradually calmed. Cultivators couldn't control flying swords, and Buddhist ascetic monks couldn't use all kinds of means. But they could walk, especially the ascetic monks who trained their bodies and spirits in the wilderness day and night, and the West Hill Divine Guards who were martial cultivators. They still had some power. Master Chi Mei led dozens of ascetic monks to the field. More than 10 West Hill Divine Guards, led by 2 priests in red, walked into the crowd. It seemed that they would soon reach Ningquebec. Ning Ke twisted his wrist slightly and tightly held the hilt of the padao. Looking at the crowd, he frowned and frowned. Chi was the chief preaching monk. Although the Great Spirit was suppressed by the chief preaching monk's words, his devil's monk's body was still strong enough, after Chi and King Xian's preaching monk's words. However, Master Chi Mei's body had become Buddha, and he was also a very strong martial artist. Ning Ke didn't have the confidence to defeat him in this situation. What made him even more uneasy was that eldest brother and Song Song's bodies were as weak as ordinary people. How could he protect them from harm? In the land of Buddha in the world, the Buddha's words rang like a distant bell. No matter how strong Ning Ke was, he couldn't leave the Buddha's land. No matter how tough he was, he couldn't help but feel a little desperate at this moment. At this moment, eldest brother spoke again. He was forced out of the limitless state by the Buddha's words. His face was as pale as paper, and his thin body hung in the air like a willow branch by the lake. But his face and body were still so clean, without a speck of dust. He looked at the chief preaching monk, and a look of firmness suddenly appeared in his clean eyes. He said slowly, "The headmaster of academy once said that a scholar who cherishes life is not enough to be a scholar. A Buddha who cherishes the world is not enough to be called a Buddha." Eldest brother still spoke very slowly and seemed very elegant. His voice was still so gentle and amiable, but his tone was so firm and firm. What he said was taught to him by his teacher many years ago. Like all the students in the back of the mountain of the academy, he never doubted his teacher's words, so he thought that his teacher's words must be reasonable. Reasonable, so of course it was effective. This was what the academy pursued. Ning Ke didn't understand why eldest brother suddenly said such words at this time, and neither did Master Chi Mei. The approaching ascetic monks and West Hill Divine Guards subconsciously stopped. Only the chief preaching monk had enough wisdom and experience to understand the meaning of eldest brother's words. His expression suddenly became solemn, and he looked at him in surprise. His right hand left the staff. A scholar who cherishes life is not enough to be a scholar. A Buddha who cherishes the world is not enough to be called a Buddha. When eldest senior brother said this, the originally quiet world suddenly underwent some extremely subtle changes, and one could faintly hear the sound of cracking. The White Tower Temple was still the White Tower Temple. It was normal as far as the eye could see, but something seemed to be broken. Gradually, a breeze rose on the surface of the lake, and the frozen lake began to ripple. The willow branches by the lake seemed to be pulled by an invisible string, and then swayed back and began to swing for the first time. It turned out that the world of the Buddha land was broken. The expression on the chief preaching monk's face was extremely complicated. He didn't expect that Mr. First's casual words could break his dharma of words, and was about to destroy his world of the Buddha land. Although Mr. First of the Academy was already the top figure in the cultivation world, he was after all only a disciple of the headmaster of the Academy. How could he do this? And when did he understand such a divine sense? As the lake wind rose again, the willow branches swayed again, and the ripples on the lake gradually expanded. The chief preaching monk's expression became more and more serious. He reached out his right hand to point at eldest brother and said quickly, "As I have heard, there is a mountain named Prujna. It is 108,000 times heavier than Tianchi Mountain. It can fill the storm sea and suppress all demons." The chi of heaven and earth in the White Tower Temple that was previously quiet suddenly rolled violently. Ordinary people couldn't see it, but cultivators could feel it. It was rolling like heavy rain clouds, and they could feel the terrifying power contained in it. They instinctively felt a strong sense of vigilance, and even wanted to avoid it. The violent chi of heaven and earth suddenly compressed at an unimaginable speed, and then turned into a seemingly infinite mountain. It broke through the air and blasted at eldest brother's body that was gradually getting rid of the restraint of the Buddha's words. The Buddhist temple was still quiet and there was no sound. But eldest brother felt that his ears rang with the sound of countless boulders crushing his body, as if a mountain had already pressed on his shoulders. His body was originally very ordinary. Compared to Jun Mo and Ning Ke, his shoulders seemed to be unable to bear much weight. He suddenly tottered, and the soles of his shoes touched the ground. His knees gradually bent, but he still refused to fall. There was a puff. Eldest brother spat out a mouthful of dark red blood. He stared at the chief preaching monk's eyes and rebuked him directly. Confucius said, "Everyone in the world travels in the same carriage. We should not look inside. Don't speak quickly. Don't point personally." Even at this moment, when he spoke with a reprimanding tone, his voice was still so gentle, making others want to get close to him. It contained a powerful persuasive aura, and it also contained an extremely powerful might. When the words "don't look inside" came out, the chief preaching monk suddenly felt a little sore in his eyes. When the words "don't speak quickly" came out, the scripture he was reciting quickly stopped. When the words "don't point personally" came out of eldest brother's mouth, the chief preaching monk suddenly felt that the giant mountain named Sumeru was between his fingers. His arm fell down and could no longer point at eldest brother's body. The chief preaching monk's expression became more and more solemn. His long silver eyebrows fluttered, and his lips opened slightly. He recited another scripture. This time, he recited very slowly, but every word was like thunder and extremely strict. "This is what I have heard. With the power of Samadhi, all the mountains, trees, plants, and land in the mist world become the 7 treasures. Everyone can see it and listen to the wonderful teachings in front of the Buddha. As you think, you may see yourself in green, yellow, white, purple, red, black, or wind, or fire, or emptiness, or fire, 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 or water, or water foam, or mountains, or emperor or flowers, or Garuda, or stars, or elephants, or wild foxes." The Buddha's words resounded through the temple like thunder and kept exploding in the air. The lake suddenly became uneasy, the willow branches on the shore broke and fell, and the white tower glowed with colorful light. The tens of thousands of believers who were kneeling on the ground finally heard the thunderous Buddha's voice. They raised their heads subconsciously and looked up at the sky, but there was no trace of lightning. Countless auras of heaven and earth came from all directions of the Yueluan kingdom, stirring up dust and wind, breaking trees and startling beasts. They arrived at Chaoyang City and went to the White Tower Temple. The clouds in the sky had covered Chaoyang City for a whole winter. There was no change except for the continuous gathering of clouds and thickening of them. However, even the strange clouds seemed to feel the horror of the chief preaching monk's Buddha's words and began to stir uneasily. The dark gray clouds rolled and twisted violently. It looked as if there were thousands of black snakes twisting and twisting inside the clouds. Occasionally, the clouds would be torn apart, revealing a gap for a brief moment. Sunlight would shine through the gap, but it would be scattered by the clouds into countless colors and twisted into countless shapes. The colors of the heavenly light fell on the White Tower Temple. They were green, white, or black. People looked at the colors on their bodies and were at a loss. In the eyes of the cultivators, the heavenly light that was twisted into countless shapes was even more terrifying. Because in their consciousness, the heavenly light turned into Buddhist Bantis holding Vajra, ferocious strange beasts of the Buddhist sect, and countless water and fire pouncing on them. Ning Ke knew that this was not an illusion, nor was it the chief preaching monk's spiritual world. It was the real aura of heaven and earth. The chief preaching monk had used the Supreme Buddha's power to simulate the aura of heaven and earth into the shapes of Buddhas in the sky. Blood seeped from the corner of his mouth. Under the Supreme Buddha's power and before the Buddhas in the sky, he had no power to resist. He could only slowly kneel down, his face pale with pain. His snow mountain and ocean of chi seemed to be about to be destroyed. Sang Sang, who was on his back, was in an even worse condition. When the heavenly light shone through the gap in the clouds and fell on her, her body was suddenly plated with a layer of black. Although her face was pale, there was a faint dark gray color. She kept vomiting blood, just like what happened in the back temple of Lank Temple. All of it had turned into something like ink. At this time in the White Tower Temple, the only one who could compete with the words of the chief preaching monk was the eldest brother of the academy. Naturally, he became the main target of the Supreme Buddha's power. There were no colors in eldest brother's eyes. There were no wild foxes, no giant elephants, no merciless floods, and no raging fire. He only saw the Buddhas in the sky, accompanied by the stars, rushing towards him. Every king in the ancient myths had Supreme Buddha's power. Every Buddha in the Buddhism sect had Supreme Buddha's power. Every star had the power of heaven and earth that could not be shaken. Eldest brother's bones began to crack. Blood seeped from the corner of his eyes. His face grew paler, and even his state was on the verge of collapse. However, his expression was still so resolute. Eldest brother raised his head and looked at the raging dark clouds. He looked at the seven-colored light that descended from the sky, the ancient gods and Buddhas, and the stars that fell like rain. He shouted, "I do not speak of strange powers and gods." He didn't speak. The chief preaching monk's silver eyebrows drooped. A streak of blood suddenly flashed across his old face. The Buddha's words suddenly stopped. Strange. Force. Chaotic. God. Eldest brother spat out a mouthful of blood with every word he said. He had spat out blood 4 times in a row. His face became extremely pale, like a clean snowfield that no one had ever seen before. As soon as he finished speaking, the clouds above Chaoyang City suddenly became still. The violent clouds that had been tearing each other squeezed together in fear, and the gaps that had been opened closed immediately. Not a single ray of light could penetrate the clouds and shine on the ground. The colorful colors disappeared instantly, and the White Tower Temple returned to its original appearance. The giant elephants and wild foxes formed by the power of Buddha made a few whining sounds and scattered into countless light spots, disappearing into the sky. As for the legendary venerables of the Buddhist sect, who were holding the golden pestle, the sages in the ancient myths, and the stars that fell like rain, they instantly disappeared without a trace. He didn't speak of strange powers and chaotic gods. All the Buddhas retreated. The aura of heaven and earth from all over the Yueluan kingdom gradually stopped, bringing a strong sandstorm to Chaoyang City. The White Tower Temple, which had just returned to its original appearance, suddenly became extremely dark. The chief monk of scripture silently looked at the figure that could fall at any time in the sandstorm. He looked at his cotton jacket that had been soaked in blood, and his silver eyebrows slowly fluttered. No one knew what he was thinking. Tens of thousands of people in the White Tower Temple looked at the sky in shock. They didn't understand what had just happened. Many of them began to rub their eyes, wondering if they had hallucinations. Master Chi Mei and the cultivators of the Buddhism and Taoism sects looked at the scholar in the field. Their faces were full of shock. Even Chi Mei's eyes were full of awe. Everyone knew that the scholar had been seriously injured in order to resist the chief monk's Buddhist words. However, his words could make all the Buddhas disappear, which was enough to shock the world. Mr. First of the Academy was indeed Mr. First of the Academy. Eldest brother raised his right arm and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He looked at the chief monk of scripture and said to Ning Kei behind him, "Teacher said that a gentleman does not stand in a dangerous place. If we don't leave now, when will we?" Ning Kei looked at eldest brother's back, and suddenly turned around and rushed out of the crowd. Eldest brother coughed in pain and disappeared again. A huge wind rolled up beside the chief monk of scripture. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 642. In fact, it was not the wind, but the aura of heaven and earth that was invisible to the naked eye and could never be perceived by ordinary people. It revolved around the chief preaching monk's body and drove the flow of air. The limitless state, which was above the 5 states, was a state that was hard to understand, but it did exist. Eldest brother moved at an unimaginable speed, or in a way that surpassed the speed between the countless doors of the aura of heaven and earth that was invisible to the naked eye. The aura of heaven and earth rolled into a turbulent current, completely isolating the chief preaching monk from the real world. At this time, the world that the chief preaching monk saw was countless monotonous lines. He could not hear any sound, and his voice could not reach the real world. He was temporarily separated from the real world. Ning Kei did not miss this opportunity. He began to flee with Sang Sang on his back. The gods and Buddhas that were formed by the chi of heaven and earth were shattered into nothingness by eldest brother's words. They suddenly lost their image, and turned into countless shiny fragments. He passed through them, and the fragments fell on his and Sang Sang's bodies and heads. They were stuck by the thick blood on their bodies and sparkled as if they were embedded with countless diamonds. The cultivators from both the Buddhism and Taoism sects had already surrounded them from all directions. Ning Kei leaped across and had just found a relatively weak point to break through when he found Chi Mei not far in front of him. The chief preaching monk was temporarily trapped by eldest brother. Master Chi Mei was the most powerful and Ning Kei was most wary of him. But this powerful cultivator from the Xiankong Temple did not give him any chance. Facing Chi Mei and the crowd of people in the White Tower Temple, Ning Kei did not have the confidence to escape Chaoyang City with Sang Sang. The crowd had already surrounded them, blocking the bridges and corridors of the White Tower Temple. The ascetic monks of the Buddhism sect began to gather. 2 red-robed priests appeared in front of the crowd with more than 10 West Hill Divine Guards. Ning Kei felt a chill, but the next moment, he noticed something strange. The 2 red-robed priests from the West Hill Divine Palace had strange expressions on their faces. The 2 red-robed priests looked at Ning Kei, who was running at a high speed. They were not vigilant, frightened, or angry. They seemed very calm, with infinite respect and a touch of determination. Ning Kei was sure that he had never seen the 2 red-robed priests before. Then he noticed that when the 2 red-robed priests showed respect and determination, they were not looking at him, but at Sang Sang on his back. The 2 red-robed priests stood beside Chi Mei. More than 10 West Hill Divine Guards and dozens of ascetic monks of the Buddhism sect were gathering toward them. They intended to form a thick wall here and stop Ningquebec. A pure white flame slowly burned from the palms of the 2 priests in red, instantly illuminating the quiet temple that was shrouded in clouds. It was the Haotian Divine Light. The eyes of the dozen or so West Hill Divine Guards brightened under the Haotian Divine Light. Their previous fear of Ning Kei had turned into confidence and pride, as well as the fanaticism of martyrs. Looking at the Haotian Divine Light burning in the palms of the 2 red-robed priests, Ning Kei's pupils shrank and his heart was filled with great vigilance. Sang Sang, who was once the Lady of Light, possessed the purest Hautian divine light in the world. He was no stranger to the West Hill divine skill. He knew that even in the West Hill divine palace, where there were countless powerhouses, there were very few priests who could cultivate the divine skill. But today there were two of them. The West Hill divine palace was indeed powerful. Seeing Ning Kei's figure getting closer and closer, the determination in the eyes of the two red-robed priests became more and more solemn and devout. The Hautian divine light burning in their palms became more and more intense. For holy white flames rose from their palms, illuminating the entire place. Master Chi Mei looked at Ning Kei and sighed. He slowly moved 2 steps to the side. Ning Kei understood what he meant. If Master Chi Mei and the 2 red-robed priests joined hands, he would not be able to break through. But he did not kill the little boy, so Chi Mei gave him a chance to fight with the 2 powerful red-robed priests first. However, both Ning Kei and Master Chi Mei did not expect that the 2 priests in red from the West Hill Divine Palace were not using their divine skills on Ning Kei, but on themselves. The flames of Hautian's divine flame gushed out from the palms of the 2 red-robed divine priests, gushed out from under their red robes, drilled through the gaps of the fine cloth, gushed out from their mouths, noses, eyes, ears, and every strand of hair and pore. The 2 divine priests' bodies seemed to have turned into 2 bright lamps. Master Chi Mei instantly sensed that great danger was coming, but he had no time to avoid it. With a muffled groan, he sat cross-legged on the ground, formed the lotus emblematic gesture, and covered his eyes with his hands. The 2 red-robed priests looked at Sang Sang in the distance and smiled calmly. Their smiles were illuminated by the light. Then their bodies shone brightly and suddenly burned themselves. Then they self-exploded. Boom, boom, boom. The chi of heaven and earth in the White Tower Temple suddenly became chaotic. The lake water shook violently. Countless weeping willows broke and fell to the ground. Countless blood and broken limbs flew in the air. In an instant, many people died. The West Hill Divine Skill was the highest Taoist access to save and cure people. However, who would have thought that once they decided to burn themselves with light, they could kill people and have such a terrible power? The dense mass of people was forcibly blasted open by the explosion of the 2 red-clothed divine officials. In that empty area there was only death, and no one was able to stand. As for the bodies of the 2 red-robed priests, they had already turned into ashes in the terrible self-explosion. There was no trace of them. Only the fragments of their red robes slowly fell in the air, like coagulated blood. A piece of the red robe floated to Ning Kei's shoulder. Sang Sang stretched out her slightly trembling fingers and picked up the piece of clothing. She looked a little confused. She did not know why the 2 red-robed priests had self-exploded so tragically. But she saw the way the 2 priests looked at her before they died, so she knew that it was all for her. The smoke and dust gradually dispersed. The White Tower Temple was a mess. There were cries and moans of the wounded everywhere. Looking around, there was a river of blood and piles of broken limbs. It was a terrible scene. There were countless deep bloodstains on Master Chi Mei's body, as well as many scorch marks. Although his body had become a Buddha, he was still seriously injured in the face of the self-explosion of 2 priests in red from West Hill. If he hadn't stepped aside when he saw Ning Kei coming over, he would have been even more seriously injured at this time. He put down his palms that covered his eyes and looked at the scene. His face became extremely serious. He did not find Ning Kei and the daughter of Yama. The dozens of black crows had flown far away. I made a huge mistake. I thought riding on an empty stomach would make me feel better, but I forgot that I'm a foodie, so I feel terrible riding. I'll go eat first, then I'll continue writing. I'll have at least 3 chapters today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 643. An arrow hit Ning Kei's shoulder heavily. The sharp arrowhead tore his shirt but did not penetrate deep into his flesh. It only left a shallow wound. Sang Sang, who was holding the black umbrella behind him, trembled slightly. Countless arrows fell like a rainstorm. The big black umbrella behind them was like a small black boat in the ocean, constantly trembling, as if it would capsize and sink to the bottom of the sea at any time. Leaving the White Tower Temple did not mean that they could leave Chaoyang City. The Yueluan Kingdom's troops from other counties had already taken control of the entire capital. There were archers everywhere in the street. Ning Kei's body was strong, but he was still slightly injured by the continuous arrows. The big black umbrella shielded Sang Sang from most of the arrows, but the holes on the umbrella were extremely dangerous. To avoid the dense rows of archers, he did not choose to launch a surprise attack on the long street. Instead, he began to circle around the streets and alleys. The black crows flew above his head, making unpleasant cawing sounds. However, the truly brave and fearless residents of Chaoyang City were still in the White Tower Temple, so not many dared to stop him. Circling around would take some time. There was still a long way to go before he reached the city gate. What made him uneasy and nervous was that he finally heard the thundering sound of hooves from afar. The heavy cavalry of the Yueluan Kingdom had finally arrived. The heavy cavalry was the most powerful means of dealing with cultivators in the human world. Although the heavy cavalry of the Yueluan Kingdom was much weaker than the black armored cavalry of the Tang Empire and the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace, they could still overwhelm Ning Kei and Sang Sang to death as long as there were enough of them. At this moment, a horse carriage with the emblem of the Divine Hall appeared at the entrance of the alley in front of them. Ning Kei stopped in his tracks. The curtains of the carriage were lifted, revealing an aged face and a red divine robe. Looking at the old priest in the horse carriage, Sang Sang subconsciously clenched her fists. There was a piece of red cloth in her hand, but she did not know which one of the two priests in red had self-destructed. Ning Kei sped up and rushed into the horse carriage. The horse carriage started slowly and then gradually sped up, rushing out of the alley. The old priest in red asked, "Which direction?" Ning Kei replied, "North." Previously in the White Tower Temple, the two priests in red from the West Hill used their divine skills to explode themselves to clear the way for him and Sang Sang. Only then did he have the opportunity to avoid Master Chi Mei and successfully escape into Chaoyang City. The divine skill of Haotian Taoism was a kind dharma and was regarded as the greatest gift that Haotian could give to his followers. In the West Hill scriptures, using the divine skill to self-destruct was regarded as a great blasphemy to Haotian and was strictly prohibited. It was said that after death, the person who did so would never be able to enter the divine kingdom of Haotian, and his soul could only drift alone in the underworld for eternity. For ordinary believers of Haotian, not being able to enter the holy kingdom of Haotian was an unacceptable and cruel punishment. Moreover, the two red-robed priests could cultivate the divine skill, so their faith in Haotian must be extremely firm. So what was the reason that made the two red-robed priests willing to sink into the underworld to save him? Sang Sang vaguely sensed it, but Ning Kei had no time to think about it. He had been puzzled until he saw the old priest in the horse carriage. Both he and Sang Sang had seen this old priest in the Taoism temple in the kingdom of Qi. The old priest's name was Chen Siyuan, and he was a red-robed priest of the West Hill Divine Palace stationed in the kingdom of Qi. He was highly respected in the kingdom of Qi, and most importantly, he was from the Divine Hall of Light. Sang Sang leaned on Ning Kei's shoulder and blinked her eyelashes. She said sadly, "Why do you have to do this?" Chen Siyuan said humbly, "This is our own choice. Even if we can't enter the divine kingdom of Haotian, we won't feel any regret. Great divine priest, you don't have to be sad." Ning Kei was driving at this time, but he heard the words very clearly. He was sensitive to the fact that the old priest did not call Sang Sang the Lady of Light like he did in the kingdom of Qi, but directly called her the Great Divine Priest. He was even more sure that his guess was correct. He asked, "Those two priests are?" Chen Siyuan looked a little sad and said indifferently, Hua Yin is the court priest of the Kingdom of Song, and Song Sisi has always been in the Great River Kingdom. If they were reluctant to leave the glory of the human world, they would not have followed me to Yuelwan. The red-robed priests had a very high status in Haotian Taoism. The West Hill Divine Palace was ordinary on the Peach Mountain, but as long as the red-robed priests were sent to the human world, they would often have the dignity and power of an emperor, just like Chen Siyuan in the Kingdom of Qi. Ning Ke became even more silent when he heard the origin of the two red-robed priests. The carriage of the West Hill Divine Palace ran wildly in Chaoyang City. The black raven flew over again and circled around the carriage. Ning Ke was very familiar with the streets of Chaoyang City, and maybe because of the Divine Hall emblem on the carriage, the cavalry of the Yueluan Kingdom was afraid of it. They managed to break through several obstructions without any danger. The dense sound of horse hooves and bamboo flutes rang again in Chaoyang City. The cavalry of the Yueluan Kingdom finally came to their senses and began to chase the carriage. The ascetic monks of the Buddhism sect also began to gather in the direction of the Black Raven. Ning Ke turned to look at the white pagoda in the distance to his right. He was very worried about eldest brother who was still there and did not know the final result of the battle with the chief preaching monk. At this time, he suddenly saw that Song Song's trousers on her calf had been torn. There was an extremely deep wound there. It must have been caused by the big black umbrella when she was attacked by the archers, and a piece of flesh was torn by the arrowhead. It must have been very painful, but she did not make any sound. They were close to the North City Gate. The carriage had taken a detour in the city to avoid the archers and cavalry. The ascetic monks of the Buddhism sect had already arrived there, and Ning Ke could even sense the aura of Master Chi Mei. Chen Siyuan looked in the direction of the North City Gate. The wrinkles on his face became deeper, but his eyes were extremely calm. It was the true calmness of someone who did not even care about death. This calmness showed that he was extremely determined. He looked at Sang Sang and the wound on her leg. The arrow wound on Song Song's calf did not bleed, perhaps because she had lost too much blood recently. However, there were some faint traces of black blood on the edge. Chen Siyuan said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Great Divine Priest, please tell me that we did not do anything wrong." Sang Sang looked at this loyal old subordinate and felt a little sad. She was ready to tell the truth. Ning Ke waved the horsewhip and lashed in front of the carriage. The whip was loud and clear. This horsewhip seemed to be lashing on Song Song's heart. Sang Sang clenched the red cloth in her palms so tightly that her nails seemed to pierce into her flesh. After a moment of silence, she looked at the wrinkles on Chen Siyuan's face and said calmly, "Light will never make mistakes." Hearing her answer, the deep wrinkles on Chen Siyuan's face stretched out. He seemed to be 10 years younger in an instant and was full of vitality. He knelt in front of her and piously kissed the back of her foot. There were no other people outside the North City Gate, only dozens of ascetic monks of the Buddhism sect. Master Chi Mei stood in front of these ascetic monks. His pale face looked very calm. The wounds on his body were still bleeding. The self-explosion of the two priests in red had caused him a lot of damage. In particular, the divine light ashes in his wounds were like light chip. Not only did they not have any healing effect, but they continued to cut his flesh. Logically speaking, he and these ascetic monks of the Buddhism sect should have a higher chance of winning if they intercepted Ning Ke within the city. However, he chose to fight outside the city. This was because Ning Ke did not pull out his padao when he faced the little boy in the White Tower Temple. As a high monk of the Buddhism sect, why couldn't he not harm the innocent? A carriage rushed out of the seemingly empty city gate of Chaoyang City, bringing with it a cloud of dust. Master Chi Mei silently chanted the name of Buddha and slowly raised his right hand. His index finger and thumb pointed at the horse. He actually used his incomplete hand to display the complete Buddhist mantra Mahamudra. The carriage did not stop. Instead, it instantly broke through the powerful aura of Buddhism and continued to crash into Master Chi Mei and the dozens of ascetic monks. The reason was that the carriage suddenly burned. It was not an ordinary burning. It was burning with Haotian's divine light. The Haotian's divine light that could purify everything in the world gushed out from the curtain of the carriage and instantly broke through the shroud of the mantra Mahamudra. Master Chi Mei suddenly froze. After the two priests in red in the White Tower Temple self-exploded, he knew that there were people in the West Hill Divine Palace who did not want the daughter of Yama to die. Therefore, he was extremely vigilant. However, he still did not expect that there would be another priest who willingly fell into the underworld. Moreover, looking at the Haotian's divine light that gushed out from the carriage, the priest in red was even more powerful. The burning carriage continued to move forward. Master Chi Mei hurriedly ordered the monks to retreat. His heart became heavier. What happened to the West Hill Divine Palace? What happened to the Haotian Taoism sect? In the entire Haotian Taoism sect, there were no more than 10 priests in red who could cultivate divine skills. Today, 3 of them actually came to Chaoyang City. And these 3 priests in red actually betrayed the West Hill Divine Palace to help the daughter of Yama escape. A blazing and bright ball of light appeared in the field outside Chaoyang City. The burning carriage instantly shattered and then turned into nothingness. Instead, it was replaced by countless powerful divine lights that gushed out and scattered in all directions. The wind was blowing and the gravel was rolling. Dozens of Buddhism sect cultivators were shaken away. Master Chi Mei bore the brunt of it and was seriously injured again. When the priest in red, Chen Siyuan, began to burn the last of his life, Ning Kai had already jumped off the carriage from behind with Sang Sang on his back. Then, under the cover of the flame, he sprinted forward. The burning carriage was the most fearless vanguard, as well as the most valiant paving the way. The ball of light that the old priest exchanged for with his life shook the field outside the city. In the wind and gravel, Ning Kai carried Sang Sang on his back and rushed through the Buddhism sect powerhouses who had been shaken down. Sang Sang buried her head behind his shoulder. She did not look at the divine light that was falling everywhere in the field and clenched her fists. Ning Kai ran and looked at the great green mountain not far away in the north. He whistled. The sound of the whistle was neither loud nor sharp. It seemed to be carelessly blown. But the black crows flying in the sky heard it very clearly and responded with unpleasant cawing sound. In the distant great green mountain, there came a sad neigh of a horse. I'm suddenly excited to write and haven't eaten yet. Go eat now and try to finish the 3rd chapter before 3 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 644. The big black horse had been living in the great green mountain this winter. It did not feel lost after leaving Ning Kai's side, nor did it have any problems in life. Instead, it was free from the confinement. It chewed flowers, ate meat, slept lazily, and basked in the sun all day long. It was so happy that even the dark clouds that shrouded Chaoyang City only worried it for half a day. However, recently, countless powerhouses gathered in Chaoyang City like the pictures in the sky. Especially since this morning, when the chi of heaven and earth in the city was in chaos, it knew that its happy time was coming to an end. It had no choice but to find the bushes, endure the thorns, and dig the ground covered with thick leaves. Its front hooves were very powerful. Once it kicked with all its strength, it was much more powerful than the hoes of ordinary laborers. It did not take long for it to kick away all the leaves and dig out the pit. The black carriage lay quietly in the pit. Except for some dust, it was not damaged at all. The lasso and shafts were slightly erected in front of it, indicating that it had long been prepared. The big black horse sighed and lowered its head to get into the lasso. Then it exerted all its strength and stamped its 4 hooves on the slanting wall. It spent a lot of effort and finally dragged the heavy carriage to the ground. It dragged the carriage out of the thorns and through the dense forest. It was slightly relieved when it did not see any tourists along the way. Then it realized why there were no tourists and became very worried. It came to the grassy slope in the south and looked toward Chaoyang City. It panted slightly and waited nervously. After waiting for a long time, it finally heard the familiar whistle. The whistle was very soft, but the big black horse heard it clearly. In its world, the whistle was a rope that would bring it to its death. To its annoyance, it had thought that it hated the whistle, but after hearing it, it found that it could not help but be excited. It could not help but feel ashamed. With such complicated feelings, the big black horse neighed violently and dragged the heavy black carriage along the grassy slope in the south of the great green mountain toward the field outside Chaoyang City angrily. When it rushed to the field, it saw at least hundreds of cavalrymen rushing out of Chaoyang City and chasing after that figure. It could not help but become angrier. It panted fiercely and sped up again. On the vast field north of the city, hundreds of cavalrymen of the Ueluan kingdom came with the wind and dust. Their hooves were as dense as rain, and their momentum was astonishing. They formed a huge fan. About 1,000 feet in front of the fan, Ning Ke kept running with Sang Sang on his back. He listened to the clear and loud hoofbeats behind him and watched the black horse carriage getting closer and closer. He was very nervous. Seeing that the situation was dangerous, the big black horse neighed violently. Dragging the heavy carriage, it sped up again and turned into a cloud of black smoke. It arrived before the Ueluan kingdom cavalry swallowed the figure. Ning Ke lowered his body and jumped into the black horse carriage like lightning. At this time, hundreds of cavalrymen of the Ueluan kingdom had also caught up with the black carriage. If the carriage could not stop, it would immediately be surrounded by these cavalrymen. The big black horse neighed again. Its thick lips trembled violently in the wind. Its big white teeth, which still had some rabbit meat left from last night, looked especially scary in the light. It suddenly jumped to the left. The Ueluan kingdom's war horses at the front heard the horses neigh and looked at it. For some reason, they felt a chill in their bodies. Their legs suddenly weakened and they fell to the ground with a thud, causing a cloud of smoke and dust to splash. The big black horse forced a turn, but the heavy carriage continued to move forward according to inertia. With a very strong force, the rope was deeply tied around its smooth neck, leaving a bloody mark and a few strands of its hair falling off. With another violent neigh, the big black horse used all its muscles and forcibly stopped the carriage from moving forward. The carriage tilted and was about to fall. The steel wheels that were deeply embedded in the soil shook up a lot of soil on the ground. The soil was like stones, smashing on the faces of the Ueluan kingdom's war horses that were rushing at the front but luckily did not fall. For a moment, only the frightened neighs of the horses could be heard. The fan-shaped charge of hundreds of cavalrymen was gradually disrupted. The carriage tilted the moment Ning Ke jumped into the carriage with Sang Sang on his back. It was extremely dangerous and he fell twice. At this time, he finally managed to stabilize his body and hit a spot on the carriage wall with his palm. The crystal in his palm was embedded in the talisman array in the carriage wall. A paper talisman turned into green smoke between his fingers. The talisman power suddenly came out and helped the talisman array on the carriage wall to activate at a high speed. There was a very slight sound, like a feather floating in the air, and the heavy carriage suddenly became much lighter. The steel wheels floated out of the ground. The big black horse was the first to notice the change. It neighed happily and kicked its 4 hooves as fast as lightning, dragging the carriage towards the north like a light cloud of dust. The big black horse's speed was really unreasonably fast. Once the talisman array on the carriage was activated, no one in the world could catch up with it except for cultivators in the distanceless state. The hundreds of cavalrymen of the Ueluan kingdom were already dumbfounded by the black smoke, not to mention catching up with it. As the big black horse galloped wildly, it turned its head to look at the silly war horses and cavalrymen of the Ueluan kingdom in the distance, and neighed arrogantly. It thought to itself, "Are they stupid to compete with me in speed?" When it passed by the Daqing mountain, its complacency turned into reluctance and regret. It thought to itself that if it left today, Whether it fled with Ning Ke or returned to the back of the mountain of the academy, it would never be able to enjoy such happiness again. Thinking of this, the big black horse could not help but sigh and neighed loudly. In the Daqing mountain, the birds and beasts, tigers, leopards, wolves and bears, who had been humiliated and harmed for a whole winter, trembled with joy when they heard the horse's neigh. They thought to themselves that the master had finally left and he should never come back. The black carriage left Chaoyang City. The dark cloud that had shrouded the city for a whole winter also slowly left Chaoyang City and moved towards the north in the high sky. The cloud layer was very high, so it seemed to be moving slowly, but in fact it was moving at an amazing speed. Master Chi Mei withdrew his gaze from the sky and took the reins from his side. He led dozens of ascetic monks and chased towards the north. However, he knew the speed of the black carriage under the cloud layer and knew that he and his people would not be able to catch up with it. The dark cloud left, and the sunshine that had not been seen for many days finally sprinkled generously on Chaoyang City. The people of Chaoyang City rarely saw the blue sky, but they did not show any joy. Under the blue sky, the white tower that had regained its clear light looked exceptionally beautiful. The lake reflected the skylight and the shadows of the trees. There was still a lot of blood on the ground, and the corpses of the people had been moved away. On the open space by the lake, the eldest brother appeared. He was coughing desperately and painfully. He coughed so hard that he bent over, as if he was going to cough out his lungs. He could not cough out his lungs, but he could cough out blood. In just a moment, the snow-white handkerchief in his hand that covered his mouth had become dark red, as if it had been red since the beginning. In the cultivation world, the eldest brother of the academy was a legend. Few people had seen him fight, but the two world wayfarers, Yi Su and Tang, had always regarded him as their cultivation goal. It could be imagined how high his state was. However, his opponent today was the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple, the Buddha in the human world, and a figure who had become a legend. After all, a legend was not a myth. It was already very incredible that the eldest brother could break the chief preaching monk's Buddhist words and force him to stay where he was, creating an opportunity for Ning Ke to escape. However, he had not rested for a whole year. He used the limitless state to search for Ning Ke and Sang Sang in all the Buddhist temples, Taoist temples, and cities in the world. He was extremely tired, and his state showed signs of instability. After today's battle, he was seriously injured, and it was very likely that it would affect his future cultivation. Even so, his expression was still gentle and indifferent, and there was a purity between his eyebrows that made people want to get close to him. Except for the occasional frown when he coughed, he did not have any extra emotions. Today's battle between the leader of the Buddhism sect and Mr. First of the Academy was so magical that it was beyond description. It was absolutely qualified to be recorded in the history of cultivation, or drawn into the myths of the Buddhist scriptures. Although the chief monk of scripture had suffered many setbacks, his body and mind were both indestructible, so he was not injured at all. He was still a legend and the final winner. But because Ning Ke had successfully escaped with the daughter of Yama, he was also a loser. If it were an ordinary person, he would probably be angry and want to fight again. However, the expression on the chief preaching monk's face was as calm and gentle as that of the eldest brother, without any hint of anger. He looked at the eldest brother and praised, "Fortitude and dullness are benevolence." The eldest brother saluted back and said, "I'm ashamed to say that." The chief preaching monk thought of the most crucial scenes in today's battle, and said with a smile, "Children don't talk. I should have known that the headmaster of the academy wouldn't know the old method of words come true." He looked at the eldest brother and asked, "When did the headmaster of the academy teach you the method?" The eldest brother wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and answered slowly, "The headmaster never taught me." The chief preaching monk looked at him quietly and suddenly asked, "Did you figure it out yourself?" The eldest brother nodded. The chief preaching monk's silver eyebrows fluttered slightly, and he asked, "The Buddha's words have not been heard in the world for a long time. When did you figure it out?" The eldest brother answered honestly, "When the master spoke the Buddha's words." After hearing the answer, the chief preaching monk was silent for a long time. His silver eyebrows slowly fell down, and he looked at the scholar and sighed. Hearing Tao in the morning and knowing one's destiny in the evening. It turns out that the story is actually true. The chief preaching monk stood up with his silver cane in hand, and walked slowly and heavily to the carriage. When he reached the carriage, he turned to the eldest brother and said, "Ning Kei and the daughter of Yama went all the way to the north. With the black crow as the guide and the dark clouds above, you can't help him anymore. Go back to the academy to rest." After a moment of silence, the eldest brother said, "And the headmaster?" The chief preaching monk said slowly, "It is said that you, Li Man, are so kind and benevolent that you don't even know how to lie. I didn't expect that you would learn to lie for your youngest brother." Then he sighed and said, "What you said on behalf of the headmaster of the academy was actually your own guess. It was not the headmaster's confirmed idea at all, so I didn't agree." The eldest brother had previously told the chief preaching monk about the headmaster's opinion. If Sang Sang died, the imprint of Yama in her body would be released, and then the location of the human world would be exposed to Yama. So she couldn't die. But now the chief preaching monk said that it was not the headmaster's opinion, but his own guess. The eldest brother's body stiffened slightly, and he didn't understand how the chief preaching monk could tell. This is the third chapter. Try to finish the next chapter before 4:40. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 645. Eldest brother said, "I don't understand why you would say that." The chief preaching monk looked at him and said gently, "You are a student of the headmaster of the academy, so you should know his temperament. If he really thought that killing Sang Sang would lead to Yama's invasion, he would have taken Ning Kei and Sang Sang back to the academy long ago. How could there be such a story from autumn to winter?" Eldest senior brother remained silent. "I heard that in the Lank Temple, Yi Su once said that Haotian Taoism is doing the right thing, while the Buddhism sect is doing what we think we should do. Only the academy is doing what makes you happy." The chief preaching monk looked at him and said, "You have no faith and no awe. Maybe you can be infinitely powerful, but if you go on like this, you may find that you don't know what makes you happy in the end. I don't know if the headmaster of the academy is happy now, but I know he is hesitating. He doesn't know what is right and what can make him happy. Please send my greetings to the headmaster of the academy when you return. Tell him that the future of the human world depends on his hesitation." After saying this, the chief preaching monk held his staff and climbed onto the carriage with difficulty. The 16 horses neighed painfully and pulled the carriage slowly out of the temple. Looking at the carriage slowly leaving, eldest brother was still silent. He thought, would the headmaster hesitate? But if the headmaster didn't hesitate, he would have done it long ago. Winter had left, but spring had not completely arrived. The plants in the low mountains in the north of the Ueluan kingdom began to turn green. But hiding among the withered branches and frost leaves, it was not pleasant enough. The scenery on both sides of the mountain road was a little desolate. It looked like monotonous moving blocks of color on the carriage window. It was not much better than the dullness of the wilderness. In the carriage, Sang Sang was wearing a fur coat and holding a thick quilt. Her face was pale and she held a leather bag filled with liquor in her hand. When she felt cold, she would drink a few mouthfuls to warm her chest and abdomen. But she could not stop coughing. Ning Kei stared at the small medicine pot on the copper basin and carefully calculated the time. He coughed from time to time. He had basically recovered from the injury he had suffered in Chaoyang City, but there was still a small problem with his lungs. Song Song's arrow wound had already healed under his meticulous care. What made him uneasy now was that the cold aura in her body was showing signs of stirring again. He didn't know if it was because of the continuous escape, but the cold aura in her body showed signs of stirring again. The pungent smell of medicine gradually filled the carriage. He took down the bottle and put it on the floor to cool. Then, he took the wine bag from Sang Sang and stuffed a Buddhist scripture into her hand. "I can." Sang Sang looked at him pitifully. Ning Kei's heart was as hard as stone. He was unmoved and said, "Master Chishan said to read the scriptures and learn Buddhism. Even if you can recite it backwards, it is meaningless. What you need is to understand the meaning of Buddhism through reading the scriptures." Sang Sang said, "I don't know if it's useful to read so many Buddhist scriptures. Hasn't it been confirmed that it worked in Chaoyang City?" Ning Kei walked to the window and said, "Think about it. The chief preaching monk's Buddha's words are so powerful. If you can learn that move, maybe the cold aura in your body will be scared and disappear immediately with a command." Sang Sang smiled and continued to read the Buddhist scripture. Ning Kei lifted the curtain on the window and looked at the back of the mountain road. It was desolate. Evergreen pines and cypresses could be seen occasionally, but most of them were coniferous forests that had not yet sprouted new leaves. His eyes did not stay on the mountain scenery, but fell on the farther south. He wondered how eldest brother was doing now. This was the thing that worried Ning Kei the most after leaving Chaoyang City, apart from Sang Sang's health. He thought that since he had left with Sang Sang, the chief preaching monk had no reason to continue making things difficult for eldest brother at the risk of angering the teacher. So eldest brother should be safe. At this time, they were already hundreds of miles away from Chaoyang City. Master Chi Mei and the Yueluan Kingdom's cavalry had long been left behind. Ning Kei let the big black horse choose a side of the road and stopped to rest. Getting off the horse carriage, Ning Kei looked at the fine mountains and rivers on the side of the road with satisfaction. He patted the big black horse's back and filled the water bag. He began to stew dried meat and stuffed an old ginseng into its mouth. The big black horse chewed and swallowed the old ginseng in 2 bites. It felt a little bitter, but it knew that it was a great tonic. Naturally, it was too embarrassed to show its anger to Ning Quebec. This old ginseng and the herbs in the vat were stolen by Ning Kei from several especially luxurious mansions of princes and dukes in Chaoyang City in winter. They were all extremely precious items. The dried meat gradually became plump in the boiling water, and a smell of meat mixed with saliva overflowed the edge of the pot. The big black horse turned its head disdainfully and went to the side of the road to look for flowers to chew. It wanted to clear the bitter taste of the old ginseng in its mouth, but found that there were not even a few grasses, let alone flowers. It was very annoyed. Spending the winter in the great green mountain has really turned you wild. Eating flowers is something that only people like 11th brother would do. What are you chewing on? Ning Kei reprimanded it and looked up at the sky. The dark cloud was still following Sang Sang. Compared to when they were in Chaoyang City, it was thicker and darker. It felt heavy like an old, soaked cotton wadding. Ning Kei's mood was very heavy. The cloud made him very depressed. When he heard the cawing and saw a dozen black crows circling in the sky, he felt even more depressed and irritated. He really wanted to drive these black crows away, or even kill them directly. He shot them with the boxwood bow along the way, but it had no effect. He even wanted to try using the primordial 13 arrows, but he gave up the idea in the end. He was worried that these black crows could not be killed, and he would waste his precious iron arrows. Whether it was the cloud in the sky or the annoying black crows, they all followed the black horse carriage. There was a very strange smell, and they did not leave or abandon each other. It was tiresome and frightening. Ning Kei had guessed the origin of the cloud and the black crows. The gathering might be caused by the leakage of the cold aura from Sang Sang's body, which affected the flow of the aura of heaven and earth. The unkillable and intelligent black crows were more likely to be condensed from the cold aura in Sang Sang's body. The cold aura was the imprint left by Yama in Sang Sang's body. The cloud and the black crows were equivalent to Yama's means. Once it involved the existence above the human world, it seemed to be understandable no matter how strange and magical it was. The black cloud and black crows followed the black horse carriage. It was a very conspicuous sign. Ning-Kei did not know if Yama could see it, but after meeting the Ueluan Kingdom's cavalry, he was sure that many people had seen it. The black horse carriage could no longer hide its track. Ning-Kei and Song-Song's escape was watched by countless people, and they were forced to be aboveboard. In this case, Ning-Kei did not think too much about it. He ordered the big black horse to speed up, hoping to reach the wilderness as soon as possible. Once they entered the vast wilderness, with the big black horse's terrifying speed, it would be difficult for the cultivators of the two sects and the Ueluan Kingdom's cavalry to catch up with them, unless they also had eldest brother. It didn't take long for the black horse carriage to successfully pass through the northern territory of the Ueluan Kingdom. It left the border and came to the sparsely populated wilderness. It was just a simple sentence. In fact, the black horse carriage encountered many interceptions during its escape, and even almost fell into a desperate situation several times. The powerhouses of the two sects and the Ueluan Kingdom's military set up 4 interception lines in the north. The most dangerous one happened when the black horse carriage changed its route and tried to break through from the northeast. The West Hill Divine Palace's men in ambush in the Pamir Mountains were moving north at that time, and they encountered the black horse carriage at the northeast border of the Ueluan Kingdom. There were more than a dozen deacons from the judicial department and hundreds of papal cavalrymen in the West Hill Divine Palace's team. The most terrifying thing was that there were 2 visiting professors of Hautian Taoism in the Knowing Destiny state. When Ning-Kei saw the group of powerhouses from the West Hill Divine Palace, the first thought that came to his mind was, when did the Knowing Destiny state become so common? His second thought was, how much power did Hautian Taoism hide? His third thought was, of course, to escape. Sang-Sang was now the enemy of the entire world. No matter how strong Ning-Kei was, he could not escape whenever he wanted to. The black horse carriage could pass through so many blockades, encounter so many powerhouses of the two sects, and still escape. It even crossed the border and successfully entered the wilderness. Other than the big black horse's incredible speed and Ning-Kei's rich experience in escaping, the most important reason was that someone had been secretly helping them. Ning-Kei did not know who was secretly helping him, but he could vaguely guess. His guess was only confirmed when he met the group of powerhouses from the West Hill Divine Palace, and they were forced to show themselves. Those who had been secretly helping them escape were the people from the West Hill Divine Palace. There were deacons from the judicial department, ordinary divine priests, and 2 distinguished red-robed divine priests. In the sudden encounter at the northeast border of the Ueluan Kingdom, many people had died tragically in order to protect Sang-Sang. One of the red-robed divine priests had once again used divine skill to self-destruct, severely injuring the visiting professor of Hautian Taoism in the Knowing Destiny state. Ning-Kei and Sang-Sang had been able to escape. The wind in the wilderness was still slightly cold. As one by one, the divine priests from the West Hill Divine Palace had been exposed or died in order to cover the black horse carriage's tracks, Sang-Sang became more and more silent. Ning-Kei lifted the curtains and looked at the familiar scenery of the wilderness that he had never seen before. He thought of the tragic scenes during their escape and said, "They are all from the Divine Hall of Light." Sang-Sang softly nodded. Black-robed deacons from the judicial department, Taoist priests from a Taoist temple who had volunteered to come, ordinary divine priests, and red-robed divine priests. These people came from different places, and were not all subordinates of the West Hill Divine Palace's Department of Light. But these people had one thing in common: they had all met one person before, or learned from this person, or served this person. They might even have only spoken a few words to this person. And after these experiences, no matter what these people would become in the future, the ruthless black-robed deacons from the judicial department, the visiting professor of Hautian Taoism, the distinguished red-robed divine priests, or the ordinary cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace, they would always follow the light and think that they were from the Divine Hall of Light. Because the person they had met was called Wei Guangming. Wei Guangming was the great divine priest of light in the West Hill Divine Palace for hundreds of years. At the same time, he was also the biggest traitor of the West Hill Divine Palace for hundreds of years. He was the person closest to Hautian in the eyes of the world. His only successor in the world was Sang Sang. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 646. On the West Hill Peach Mountain, the Divine Hall of Light seemed very special. It had been without a master for more than a decade, but it still had a strong hidden power. The people in the Divine Hall of Light also had a firm belief that was hard to imagine by the common people and the priests of other divine halls. This was related to the nature of the Divine Hall of Light and the history of Hautian Taoism. For countless years, the great divine priest of light seemed to always be the most special one in Hautian Taoism. It was even more so when it came to Wei Guangming. The creed of the Divine Hall of Light was that light would not make mistakes, so their belief was very firm. It pointed directly to the great divine priest, and even gradually overshadowed the majesty of Hautian. Wei Guangming's imprisonment in the Yu prison was an unbearable humiliation for the people in the Divine Hall of Light. In addition, the West Hill Hierarch and the other two divine halls spared no effort to suppress and weaken the Divine Hall of Light, which made them extremely angry. How could they believe that the successor chosen by the great divine priest of light was the daughter of Yama? They firmly believed that Sang Sang was the Lady of Light and that the storm after the Lank Temple was just a plot by the West Hill Hierarch and the other forces of Hautian Taoism to suppress the Divine Hall of Light. They believed that it was an extremely dirty thing. In this case, how could they let the Lady of Light be imprisoned or killed? However, they were relatively weak, so they could only bear it for a long time and then suddenly exerted their strength. They came from all over the world with the sea, rain and wind, and kept sacrificing and dying. They used their own lives and souls to escort the Black Horse carriage through the blockade of the Buddhist and Taoist sects and successfully entered the wilderness. Ning Ke had no faith, so it was difficult for him to understand it. The Divine Hall of Light's strong and focused faith in Wei Guangming and Sang Sang made him even more confused and shocked. The Black Horse carriage traveled on the wilderness. He looked at the black soil melting outside the window and said, "My whole family and Darky's entire village died in the hands of your teacher. But I have to admit that your teacher is a very great person. 1,000 years ago, the great divine priest of light founded the Enlightenment doctrine. 1,000 years later, you, the Lady of Light, became the daughter of Yama. In the intervening 1,000 years, your teacher was probably the biggest anomaly or traitor of the West Hill Divine Palace. Compared to him, Longqing was nothing." Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang and said, "But I don't understand. Wei Guangming has been looking for the son of Yama all his life, and he has even killed his whole family and resorted to all kinds of means. When he died together with Master on Nameless Mountain, he had already revealed his intention of seeing through your real identity. Then why didn't he tell you? In the Lank Temple, Sang Sang's identity was exposed. There was a lot of evidence. When he mentioned this to Sang Sang later, Sang Sang told him the story on the mountain on the outskirts of Chang. Comparing the two, it could be seen that Wei Guangming already knew that Sang Sang was the daughter of Yama before he died." Sang Sang shook her head and said blankly, "I don't know." Ning Ke stopped thinking about this. He thought of the 4 priests in red who had self-destructed and the subordinates of the Divine Hall of Light who had died tragically. His expression turned serious and he said, "The Divine Hall of Light will definitely be purged this time. I even suspect that this is a conspiracy of Hautian Taoism. Those bigwigs want to use the opportunity of hunting you to force the divine hall of light to reveal all their hidden strength. Then they will use purging them as an excuse. If they could not return to their homeland, where could they settle down? Sang Sang had once asked Ning Ke this question. At that time, Ning Ke had said that the safest place for them now was the back of the mountain of the academy, where there was no one else. The most sparsely populated place in the world was naturally the wilderness. From the Lank Temple to the western wilderness through the space passage left by Buddha, and then to Yuelun, Ning Ke had thought about the route to the Pamir Mountains in the east, and then to the current route. But he had never thought about going south. That was because the south of the Yueluan kingdom had always been too quiet. The powerhouses of the Buddhism and Taoism sects had always stayed in the east and north of Yueluan. They did not place anyone in the south, which was separated by the primeval forest from the Great River Kingdom and the South Jin Kingdom. This kind of silence was very strange. In Ning Ke's eyes it was very scary. That was why he had firmly chosen to go east and north instead of south. Because although there were countless powerhouses of the Buddhism and Taoism sects in the northeast, he could imagine how powerful they were. As for the quiet south, he did not know if it was the sword of the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, or the hierarch of the Western cult who was waiting for him. What if the Abbey Dean appeared? The black horse carriage continued to move into the depths of the wilderness. After a few days, a swamp shrouded in fog appeared in front of the horse carriage. At this time, the sky was dim, so the swamp in the fog looked especially quiet and gloomy. Ning Ke knew that if he had a good view, he could see that the swamp spread to the north and south, and he could not see where the edge was. This was the quagmire. It was a very ordinary and even petty name, but it was the largest wetland swamp in the world. The wilderness where the Xiankong Temple and the Right King's Palace were located was called the West Wilderness. To the east was the Great Wilderness where the Golden Palace was located, and this swamp was between the West Wilderness and the Great Wilderness. It was like the vast Min Mountain, which naturally separated the two wildernesses. If one wanted to go to the Golden Palace, then he had to pass through this swamp. The black crows circled above the horse carriage, cawing from time to time. They had accompanied them for too long, and Ning Ke was already used to it. Anyway, he could not do anything to these black crows, and he could only pretend that he did not see them. The black crows became bolder and bolder, and at this time, two of them even landed on the horse carriage. The swamp was very dangerous. The fog lingered all year round, and it was very easy to get lost. In the mud covered with shallow water and grass, there were many hidden pools that could devour people. Even Ning Ke did not have full confidence to walk out. The black horse carriage stopped at the edge of the swamp and rested for a while. Ning Ke made some simple but high-calorie food, and ate it with Sang Sang and the big black horse. He also decocted medicine for Sang Sang to drink, and then stood on the roof of the horse carriage to explore the way. Two black crows squatted at his feet, and looked up at the iron cylinder-like thing between his hands. They cawed, as if they wanted to ask him what it was. Ning Ke was a little annoyed by the crows cawing. He stretched out his feet to chase the two black crows away, and then jumped off the roof. He walked to the window and handed the binoculars to Sang Sang, looking a little uneasy. "Can't you see the way?" Sang Sang asked. Ning Ke nodded and said, "The fog in the swamp is too thick, and I can't see the gravel path that the herdsman mentioned before. There is a talisman array in the horse carriage, so I'm not worried. I'm just worried that the big black horse will fall into it." The big black horse softly neighed when it heard that. Sang Sang walked down with the big black umbrella. Ning Ke guessed what she was going to do, and shook his head disapprovingly. He said, "I told you not to use the black umbrella, and your body is so weak now. I used it in Chaoyang City, and I didn't feel anything happened. If Yama really used the black umbrella to find me, why haven't I seen him for so many years?" Sang Sang said with a smile. Seeing that he still did not agree, she led the big black horse, stepped on the saddle, stepped on the horse's back, and then climbed to the roof of the carriage. She crossed her hands and opened the big black umbrella. At the edge of the swamp, a black flower bloomed on the roof of the carriage. After a long time, Sang Sang motioned for Ning Ke to carry her down. Ning Ke noticed that her face became paler, but her body temperature was still normal, so he was a little relieved. The swamp is too deep and I can't see far. But there are indeed gravel paths, but they are covered by mud and water plants, so it's hard to find them. Besides, Master Chi Mei and the others are only 30 miles away from us. After saying this, Sang Sang rubbed her slightly painful eyebrows. She suddenly felt annoyed in her chest and abdomen, and coughed repeatedly. What made people feel helpless was that what she coughed up was not blood, but some black foam. Ning Ke took out a handkerchief and wiped the black foam off the corner of her mouth. He found that the black foam looked very clean and did not smell fishy. It even had a faint sweet smell. He smiled and said, "It really looks like black sesame paste." Sang Sang frowned slightly and said uncomfortably, "It's too disgusting." According to common sense, swamps and wetlands should only appear in hot and humid areas in the south. This place was deep in the wilderness, and it was cold and short of water all day long. There should not be any swamps at all. However, the quagmire was really strange. There were countless geothermal sources under the wilderness. For tens of thousands of years, they constantly spewed hot spring steam to the surface of the wilderness. It never froze all year round, which was why there was such a large swamp. It would not freeze even in the cold winter, and there would only be a thin layer of frost on the surface of the swamp. It was almost spring now, and the hot springs quietly flowed and spread. The thin frost had all melted, and the swamp became even more muddy. The big black horse's front hooves all sank into the wet mud of the swamp, and there was a smacking sound. Its chest was touching the ground, and it looked extremely dangerous. However, it was just bored and put its head in the mud, as if it was resting. Ning Ke stepped on 2 large pieces of iron and walked to its side. He reached out and grabbed the reins. He activated the Great Spirit slightly, and a strong force appeared in his right arm, and he forcibly lifted it out of the wet mud. The big black horse hurriedly turned to the side, and finally walked to a slightly firmer ground. It kept shaking its head, but the mud on its head could not be shaken off no matter how hard it tried, and it looked very embarrassed. Sang Sang's body was slightly better. The water vapor in the swamp was rising, and the temperature was not low, so she had been sitting on the shaft of the carriage to relax. Looking at this scene, she could not help but laugh. At this time, they had already reached the depths of the swamp known as the quagmire, and there were no longer any pursuers behind them. What they had to resist now was not the human world, but nature. The ground of the swamp was extremely soft, and it was difficult for plants to grow in the water that was rich in sulfur and other things. There was only endless wild moss, which made it even more slippery to walk, and it was easy for them to sink into the dark pool. For ordinary people, this swamp was equivalent to a dangerous place. Although Ning Ke and his group were not worried about being swallowed by the swamp, it was still extremely difficult to walk. They often could not find the pebbles that the herdsman had mentioned under the moss, and they had to wade through the mud, which made their speed very slow. Fortunately, the talisman array made the carriage as light as a feather. Otherwise, they would not be able to walk more than 2 miles in this swamp. There were a few times when they encountered a large area of water, and they really could not find a way through. Ning Ke had to spend a lot of psyche power to stick several wind talismans on the big black horse, and they finally got through the difficulties. "I'm getting more and more tired, and it's getting later and later. I'm really sorry, but there are at least 2 more chapters today. Keep working hard. I have something to report to everyone. There are only 2 days left in this month, and there is still half an hour left. Qi can only vote twice a day, so if you have more than 2 votes, you have to vote now. Otherwise, it will be a pity if you can't vote tomorrow." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 647. A difficult and dangerous place like the quagmire was more inaccessible, which meant it was safer. That was what Ning Ke thought, and so did many animals. The lake emitted a faint smell of sulfur, and could not grow any big plants, but the moss could be eaten, and the heat could avoid the winter, so many animals lived in the swamp all year round. Their main food was moss or plankton in the water. There were no lions or tigers in the swamp, but there was a fierce beast that looked like a snake and was covered with light greasy hair. This fierce beast was called the capybara by the herdsmen of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. It moved extremely fast, and its saliva was slightly poisonous. It lived on carrion, and most of the horses and sheep that got lost in the swamp were killed by this fierce beast. Ning Ke was naturally not afraid of this capybara. The capybara seemed to be able to sense his dangerous aura and would avoid him every time they met. But a few days ago, a capybara finally could not resist the temptation of the big black horse and wanted to taste the horse's meat. It hid under the water plants and launched a sneak attack on the big black horse. The big black horse bit the capybara to death and stomped it with its front hooves in disdain. Then it lowered its head and licked it. It tasted terrible and did not eat it. The fog in the quagmire became thicker and thicker. They could no longer see the thick dark cloud. Although they knew that the cloud was still floating above the horse carriage, both Ning Ke and Sang Sang felt much more comfortable. They continued to walk deeper into the swamp and estimated that it would take them 2 or 3 days to get out of the swamp. The black horse carriage came to a pond and Ning Ke suddenly felt his eyes light up. The terrain here was relatively low, and the water in the pool was about half a person's height. Compared to other parts of the swamp, it was much clearer. Perhaps because of the source, the water here could be drunk directly. The water in the pool was lush, and there were many small silver fish swimming among the water plants. There were also more than 10 white water birds drinking by the side of the pool. If eldest brother saw this place, he would be very happy. Ning Ke walked to the pond and his eyes, which had been tortured by the desolation and the swamp for many days, were suddenly refreshed by the lake. He reached into the pond and found that the temperature was just right. Then he let Sang Sang take a bath. The big black horse was chased to another pond. It rushed into the pond, neighing happily and shaking its head to wash off the mud on its body. Then it began to stare at the silver fish swimming in the water and drool. Sang Sang took off her heavy fur coat and the thin shirt inside and walked into the pool. She shivered a little when the breeze blew over the surface of the pool. She hugged herself with both hands, feeling a little cold. Sit in the water, and it will be warm. Ning Ke walked behind her with a towel and prepared to rub her back. Sang Sang obeyed. Her body slowly sank until her head was submerged in the warm water. Then she stood up again. Her wet short hair looked very smooth, and the ends of her hair dripped water on her thin shoulders. When they were young, Ning Ke often bathed Sang Sang. When they grew up, Sang Sang insisted on bathing herself, but insisted on scrubbing his back. Later, Sang Sang's illness worsened, and Ning Ke began to bathe her again. They had lived together for too many years. No matter body or soul, there were not many secrets between them. Moreover, they were already engaged, so Sang Sang would not be shy, and Ning Ke would not be embarrassed. However, the girl's body was still young, but the lines were already soft and beautiful. Sang Sang had grown up after all. Ning Ke gently rubbed his hands on her back, and after a while, he naturally reached to the front and held her. Sang Sang said softly, "Is it too small?" Ning Ke said, "It's not small anymore." He did not know if they were talking about the same thing. Sang Sang suddenly coughed. Ning Ke calmed himself down and began to scrub her back seriously. In the shortest time possible, he finished the bath and carried her back to the horse carriage. He dried her body and put on his clothes. He also hurriedly took a bath and changed into a new set of clothes. Then he sat on the grass by the pond and held her in his arms to enjoy the scenery. Seeing her slightly wet hair, he thought of some past events and smiled. Sang Sang always knew what he was thinking about. Even if she did not, she at least knew what he was thinking about. She moved her body backward and hid her whole body in his arms. She asked, "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about Shanshan," Ning Ke said honestly. "When I first saw her outside the north wall of the Yen Kingdom, it was also beside the hot spring. She stood on a tree and her hair seemed to be wet too." Sang Sang leaned on him lazily and thought of something. She said worriedly, "Miss Shanshan helped us in the Lank Temple. Will we cause any trouble for her?" Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Her teacher, the master of calligrapher, is a visiting professor of Haotian Taoism. She is a divine talisman master herself, so both the Buddhist and Taoist sects have to give her some face. Moreover, eldest brother has already taken her as his sworn sister, so it should be fine." The big black horse had also finished bathing and ran back happily. He approached the two and wanted to act coquettishly. However, as soon as he opened his mouth, Ning Ke smelled a strong fishy smell. He could not help but say angrily, "Are you a fool or a foodie? You didn't forget to eat fish even after bathing. Hurry up and go back." The big black horse walked away angrily and lay down by the pool. He basked in the sun that did not exist and was blown by the warm wind. He gradually felt better and snorted happily from time to time. The fog was like smoke and the clear pool was like a piece of excellent but very light jade. The green grass beside the pool was like a carpet and the fish in the pool was startled but the grass was not disturbed. Ning Ke held Sang Sang and looked at the beautiful scenery. Because of the relaxation, he gradually felt tired and fell asleep. No one knew how long it had been. There was no wind and the fog gradually dissipated. On the other side of the quiet pool, a faint shadow appeared. Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked in that direction. Only then did he realize that the pool was actually larger than he had imagined. The other side of the pool was at least 1,000 feet away from his side. He saw the shadow but was not vigilant. Because if the shadow was a person or a beast, it would not be able to hide from his and Song Song's perception. They thought it was a tree. The fog around the swamp became thinner and thinner, and the fog around the pool gradually dissipated. They could already see the thick dark clouds above and the scenery on the other side. The shadow on the other side of the pool was not a tree, but a person that Ning Ke and Sang Sang could not perceive. It was a beautiful woman. Even from such a distance, they could still feel the charming aura exuding from her body. However, the aura was filtered by the bloody robe on her body and turned into a murderous and terrifying aura. There was no blood on the bloody robe. The robe of judgment was originally blood red. It was usually spotless, but now there were many mud spots on it. However, the woman under the robe still gave people a feeling of being out of this world. The woman was wearing a divine crown. The divine crown was made of gold, with mithril as the thread and was inlaid with 13 bright gems. It was as if there was a curtain of light hanging down from the edge of the crown and covering her face. It was so luxurious and beautiful that people could not look at it directly. Ning Ke knew that the divine crown was very precious because he had held it in the kingdom temple of the kingdom of Qi. However, he did not know that he would see this divine crown and this blood-red robe on his escape. But the moment he saw her, he understood that it was a matter of course. It was a big deal to kill the daughter of Yama in the human world. The Buddhism sect had even invited the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong temple. As the servants of Haotian Taoism would definitely take action. The powerhouses from Haotian Taoism and Luo Kadi, who were lying in ambush in the Pamir Mountains, seemed very powerful, but in fact they were not enough. Even though the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey was far away in the Nanyang, the West Hill Divine Palace should at least send a great divine priest. The West Hill Divine Palace invited the great divine priest was her. Ning Ke felt very lucky but also very unlucky. He looked at the woman on the other side of the pool and did not know what to do except to remain silent. After a long period of silence, absolute silence, The atmosphere around the pool became very heavy and oppressive. The small silver fishes swam into the depths of the water plants in groups, and the dozens of white water birds flew away in fear. Perhaps the fog had predicted what was going to happen here in advance, so it escaped in advance. Ning-Kei suddenly laughed and waved to the opposite side. He said, "What a coincidence to meet here." Yi Hongyu said, "I waited in the mud for dozens of days and finally met you and her. Don't you think it's a coincidence?" Ning-Kei smiled and said, "Why do you have to make the atmosphere so serious? Speaking of which, didn't we have a good chat when we met in the kingdom of Qi a few months ago?" Yi Hongyu said, "First of all, she was not the child of Yama at that time. Second, it has been more than a year since we last met, not just a few months." After a short pause, she continued, "It seems that Buddha's chessboard really saved you." Ning-Kei said, "You waited for dozens of days just to hear the story of our escape from the Lank Temple?" Yi Hongyu said, "I waited for someone to kill someone." With that, she walked to the other side of the pool, her blood-red robe fluttering. Ning-Kei shouted, "If you don't want to hear the story of our escape, I can still tell you the story of the Xiankong Temple. It's quite interesting." Yi Hongyu acted as if she did not hear him. Her footsteps were slow and steady. Ning-Kei pretended to be angry and said, "This is what I dislike most about you. You always want to fight and kill." Yi Hongyu frowned slightly and stopped. She said, "I don't need your love." Ning-Kei said angrily, "I am such an excellent man. What's wrong with me?" Yi Hongyu said, "You even dared to marry the daughter of Yama. Men like you are so bold that even I am a little surprised. So it's better to kill rather than love." Ning-Kei said, "This means that you might still like me." Yi Hongyu knew what kind of person he was. She ignored him and continued forward. Ning-Kei's expression was calm, but his body was getting colder. He said, "You actually waited for us in this muddy pond for so many days. How can I repay your kindness? I want to ask you to take a bath." Yi Hongyu did not stop and said, "It's not easy to kill you. So I will definitely be stained with mud and your blood. I will wash later." Ning-Kei shook his head and said, "I don't fight with women covered in mud. No matter what kind of fight it is, I will touch a handful of mud and smell no fragrance. It won't be fun." Yi Hongyu's expression was slightly cold. She said, "It's very perverted to like to kill women." Ning-Kei stood up and looked at her calmly. He said, "You should know very well that we are all perverts. Also, try to finish writing before 4:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 648. I can't repay you for your kindness. Please take a bath. No matter who it was that said this, it would be very strange, let alone a beauty wearing a judgment god's robe. However, no one, including Ning-Kei, could have expected what happened next. Perverts are abnormal. This should be a compliment. The frost on Yi Hongyu's face gradually dissipated and was replaced by a faint smile. She reached into her collar and began to take off the divine robe. Her slender fingers moved slightly, and the thin blood-colored divine robe flew with the wind, revealing her fair body. On the other side of the pool, Ning-Kei and Sang-Sang were stunned. Yi Hongyu did not care about their gazes. She did not hide anything and walked naked into the clear water under the clouds and in the swamp. Then, she began to wash her long black hair. Ning-Kei and Sang-Sang looked at the perfect body in the pool. Looking at the graceful and charming curves, they were even more stunned. They did not know what to say or if they should stop her. After a while, Sang-Sang looked at the woman in the water and sighed, "So beautiful." Ning-Kei stared at her and nodded, "Really beautiful." Yi Hongyu's appearance in front of the black horse carriage was not a coincidence as Ning-Kei had said. The dark cloud and a dozen black crows had been following them, but not many dared to enter the quagmire to search. However, Yi Hongyu had waited alone in the swamp for dozens of days. There was no reason that she could not find them. She did not care that her body was seen by Sang Sang, especially Ning Ke, not to seduce them. Ning Ke thought of the two divine lights in her eyes on the stone steps of the kingdom of Qi and vaguely understood the reason. Those who sat on the divine throne paid more attention to spiritual cultivation and pursued the state of unhindered Taoist heart. To Yi Hongyu now, no matter how perfect and attractive her body was, it was just an annoying shell. She could not wait to throw this shell into the trash, so why would she care about being seen by others? Ning Ke suddenly asked, "How did you know that I would go this way?" Yi Hongyu took out a comb from somewhere and gently combed her hair while standing in the water. The water was up to her waist and her black hair was wet and fell on her bare chest. It was a beautiful scene. "You just said that we are all perverts. I know you very well. With your character, whether you want to return to the Tang Empire or go to the wilderness like that idiot Long Qing, you will choose to cross the quagmire." Ning Ke said, "The quagmire is not a real pond. This swamp is huge. Aren't you afraid of missing it?" Yi Hongyu continued combing her hair and looked at the black crow on top of the black horse carriage. She said calmly, "Haotians will not let me miss you." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke asked solemnly, "Must I?" "You must." Yi Hongyu combed her wet hair to the top of her head and tied it into a simple bun. Water dripped from her hair and fell into the pool, making a monotonous sound, just like her voice at that moment. "As the adjudicator, my mission is to judge the sins and evils of the world on behalf of Haotian." Ning Ke said, "But we are not guilty." Yi Hongyu said, "It was already beyond my expectations that you could escape from Chaoyang City. It is not hard to imagine that you have killed many people in the process." Ning Ke said, "If others want to kill me, I will kill them." Yi Hongyu said, "If you don't care about her, who would dare to kill you?" Ning Ke said, "Idiot, she is my wife." Yi Hongyu frowned slightly and asked, "Even if your wife is the daughter of Yama?" Ning Ke said, "Even if she is the daughter of Yama, she has never done evil." Yi Hongyu said, "I heard that Mr. First said the same thing in the Lank Temple. It seems that everyone on the second floor of the academy is like this. Don't you think it is hypocritical?" Ning Ke said, "All right, I am not the eldest brother. It is not convincing for me to say such things. But she is still my wife. Even if she is guilty of many crimes, can I not care about her?" "That makes sense. But this is your reasoning as a man, not the reasoning of the human world. Sacrificing one person to save the whole world. Is this the reasoning of the human world? I believe that both the chief preaching monk and Master Qi Mei are willing to die with Sang Sang. But you are not such a person." Yi Hongyu said, "That is right. My existence is the most important thing. Whether your wife dies or not is not enough for me to die with her. If the underworld really invades in the future, I will fight with Yama before I die. My life will not be in vain. But this does not affect me from trying to kill her. Why? She is the daughter of Yama. This is the original sin. There is no original sin. It is only about interest. It involves the interests of most people and the whole of the human world. So in your eyes, this is an unforgivable sin. Do you only understand now what is good and evil, and what is merit and sin? In the first place, this has nothing to do with morality and morality. It's only about benefits. If it's beneficial to the world, it's good, and if it's not beneficial, it's evil. If it's beneficial to more people, it's great good, and if it's not beneficial to more people, it's evil. But now that you are the great divine priest of West Hill, you do not have to follow this rule. That is right. We are the people who make the rules. We are the shepherds. But when someone threatens the sheep, or even the whole grassland, we will also follow this rule. If so, how can Haotian Taoism say that the academy is hypocritical?" Yi Hongyu looked at him and said calmly, "Haotian Taoism is hypocritical. I have never denied that. But the academy always thinks that you are not hypocritical. That is why I say that you are hypocritical. Ning Ke looked at her and suddenly said, herding sheep for 10,000 years and eating mutton in different ways, you will always get tired of it. Have you ever thought of changing your way of life? For example, hunting in the mountains. Yi Hongyu looked at him quietly and did not speak. Ning Ke said again, the underworld invasion must be a spectacular scene. For countless years, only our generation has the chance to see it. Don't you want to see the everlasting night coming to the human world? Yi Hongyu said, I want to see it, but I cannot go against Haotian's will. Ning Ke said, please, you have never heard Haotian speak. Maybe he has been lonely in heaven for tens of thousands of years, hoping that Yama will find this place and fight with him. If you kill me and Sang Sang, Yama will never find the human world. Haotian will die alone and suffer more than a bitter gourd. He knew that the woman in the pond was very scary. The scariest thing was that they were the same kind of people, but Yi Hongyu's cultivation state was always higher than his. In other words, Ning Ke could only fight with her, but he could not defeat her. He would rather fight with Master Chi Mei 3 more times, or even face the chief preaching monk again, than fight with her. So he had been trying to persuade her to let him and Sang Sang go. The conversation between the two was very fast, and it seemed that they did not go through deep thinking. In fact, it was very exhausting. It was the most complicated and wonderful persuasion he had ever done in his life. Yi Hongyu's attitude obviously changed twice, and she was almost convinced by him. But he did not succeed in the end. Yi Hongyu walked to the shore, and water droplets slid down her smooth body. Since you are sure that you don't want Yama to find the human world, then you can't kill Sang Sang. Ning Ke stared at her naked back, and his eyes brightened without any frustration. He continued, the headmaster said that if anything happens to Sang Sang, the imprint in her body will be released, and Yama will know the location of the human world. Yi Hongyu gently wiped her body, and without turning around she said directly, the headmaster would not say that. Ning Ke said, this is what the headmaster asked eldest brother to tell the chief preaching monk. Yi Hongyu began to put on her clothes. The process of putting on clothes, which would have been embarrassing for ordinary beauties, was still pleasing to the eye. If this was really the headmaster's idea, he would have brought you and Sang Sang back to the academy, or to the ends of the earth. Why would Mr. First need to run around so tirelessly? Ning Ke did not know that after he left Chaoyang City, eldest brother and the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple had a similar conversation in the White Tower Temple. The chief preaching monk's idea was exactly the same as Yi Hongyu's. When he heard Yi Hongyu's deduction, he could not help but tremble slightly. He had always thought that this was really the headmaster's idea, and he had always regarded it as Song Song's last hope. The blood-red divine robe covered with mud returned to Yi Hongyu's body, and the heavy divine crown fell slowly. The beautiful girl who was playing in the pool in the wild suddenly turned back into the terrifying great divine priest of judgment. The black crow cawed on top of the horse carriage. It was unpleasant and ominous. Ning Ke's expression was extremely ugly, and he shouted, "Shut up." The black crow was quiet for a moment, and then it began to caw again. Ning Ke laughed at himself, shook his head, and ignored it. He held Sang Sang in his arms, and looked up at the thick dark clouds in the sky with a trace of sadness on his face. This sadness was very faint, and it was very real. It was definitely not fake. Yi Hongyu looked at the other side of the river quietly, and felt his real fatigue, sadness, and confusion. She subconsciously felt some sympathy, and looked up at the dark clouds in the sky. However, the moment she looked up, she suddenly felt that something was wrong. It was not a warning. Her Taoist heart did not give any warning, which meant that everything was normal. However, there was still something wrong. She suddenly thought that a person like Ning Ke might be sad, but he should not be before the battle, because any extra emotions would not be good for the battle. He should know this very well. The most important thing was his self-deprecating smile. Even if he had experienced too many things in the past 2 years, and he could not suppress his emotions. He should not laugh at himself, because when self-deprecating smile and sadness were combined, it would mean that he had given up. Yi Hongyu firmly believed that she would not be depressed no matter what situation she faced. No matter how strong the enemy was, she would not give up until the end of the battle, and he would not give up either. This was what was wrong. Yi Hongyu looked away. She looked at the other side of the river. An iron bow appeared in Ning Kei's hands, which had been empty all this time. The bowstring was already taut, and it was suddenly loosening. The dark iron arrow had just left the bowstring, and a white turbulence was forming at the end of the arrow. Behind the iron bow, Ning Kei's calm face looked extremely cold. Yi Hongyu knew that death would come soon, and it was even destined to come. At this moment she finally understood that what Ning Kei had been doing was not the most exhausting, complicated, and exciting persuasion in his life. It was the most exhausting, complicated, and exciting arrow in his life. This chapter is well written. See you all tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 649. In the face of death, Yi Hongyu's pupils did not shrink, nor did she scream. Whether it was the shrinking of her pupils or the vibration of her vocal cords, it all required strength and time, and it was meaningless. She knelt down towards the other side of the pool. When her knees bent slightly, the iron arrow was already in front of her. She was the Tao addict who knew everything. However, she could not find a method faster than the iron arrow among the thousands of methods. At this moment, her eyes suddenly brightened. In the depths of her eyes, the divine starlight that Ning Kei had seen before burned, as if her soul was burning like firewood. The two balls of burning divine starlight shot out from her eyes and became two extremely bright mirrors of light. The dark iron arrow hit the mirror, and it suddenly broke, turning into countless floating sequins. The gorgeous divine crown broke, and the 13 bright gems were shaken into powder. The golden crown bloomed like a chrysanthemum in autumn, turning into countless dense silk petals, and then dispersed. Yi Hongyu knelt on the wetland by the shore. Blood flowed from her temples and flowed down her cheeks, dripping in front of her. She looked very embarrassed and even a little pitiful. Her injuries looked terrible on the surface, but the real serious injury was inside her body. In order to find a chance of survival under the iron arrow, the divine starlight in her eyes burned out. The divine starlight, after becoming the great divine priest, was used up just like that. The price she paid could be said to be heavy, and her Taoist heart was seriously damaged. She had seriously injured the great divine priest of judgment of the West Hill Divine Palace the first time she attacked. No matter how one looked at it, it was something to be proud of. Even second brother Jun Mo would be satisfied with it. But Ning Kei was not satisfied. He looked at Yi Hongyu, who was covered in blood on the other side of the pool. He was even very disappointed and regretful, because he knew that he could no longer attack like the first time. Understanding and understanding were not only used to describe lovers, it could also be used to describe two very similar enemies, such as him and Yi Hongyu. Ning Kei was very clear that if he wanted to defeat Yi Hongyu, the fighting methods that he was good at would not be effective. Psychological attacks such as showing weakness or intimacy were even more meaningless. So he did not show weakness, nor did he really beg for mercy. He calmly used the shameless attitude that Yi Hongyu was very used to reason and persuade her as an equal. Those words were not psychological attacks, but they were also psychological attacks. He wanted Yi Hongyu to see him as a kindred spirit, a person who was qualified to discuss with her, and then she would feel the same way. When he looked up at the sky with Sang Sang in his arms, he could temporarily make a loophole in Yi Hongyu's mind. That loophole really appeared, but it was still very difficult to take it. In Chaoyang City, he shot at Luo Kadi through the courtyard door. Luo would be alarmed, let alone Yi Hongyu. Therefore, when Yi Hongyu looked up at the dark clouds in the sky, Ning Ke calmed himself down with Zen and drew the bow with the emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect that he had comprehended in the Lank Temple. His movements were extremely casual, as if he was washing Song Song's feet or writing with a pen. It was extremely ordinary. There was no killing intent, so naturally, there was no leakage of killing intent. Sang Sang had already prepared the iron bow and iron arrows for him. Ning Ke had spent so much effort and made so many preparations, but nothing went wrong. Ning Ke's arrow was extremely brilliant. Anyone would have been fooled by him and then shot to death. However, Yi Hongyu was only seriously injured but not dead. Therefore, he felt very regretful. Then, he drew his bow again and prepared to shoot again. Dark blood flowed from the corner of Yi Hongyu's lips. She stood up and looked at Ning Ke on the other side of the pool. Although the divine starlight in the depths of her eyes had been extinguished, her eyes were still extremely bright. There was no anger in them, only indifference. His blood-stained black hair and blood-red divine robe fluttered even though there was no wind. Ning Ke pulled the bow and aimed at her body, but found that he could not aim at her at all. That was because the dancing black hair and the thin and fluttering divine robe created countless shadows in the air. He did not know which shadow was the real one. Yi Hongyu stepped on the surface of the water and swept over. Her black hair and divine robe fluttered even more wildly, leaving many shadows behind. Her movements were extremely graceful and ethereal, as if she was a fairy. At this time, the fog on the surface of the pool had long dissipated, and the field of vision was wide and clear. But when she appeared on the surface of the water, all the light in the world seemed to be absorbed by her and suddenly became dim and blurry. Perhaps it was because of the terrifying power of the iron bow in Ning Ke's hands. She did not choose to attack directly. Instead, she danced on the surface of the pool, using the shadows and the aura of heaven and earth to hide her real whereabouts. Ning Ke looked at the front of the arrowhead. His arms were as steady as a mountain, and he kept changing directions. He stared at the charming figure that moved forward and backward on the surface of the pool, not daring to relax at all. The situation seemed to be in a stalemate, but he knew that he was in a very disadvantageous position because he could not lock on to her position. After aiming for a long time, he felt that his sense of perception was being dragged by the shadows of Yi Hongyu's black hair and blood-red robe. His chest and abdomen were uncomfortable, and his face gradually turned pale. After entering the knowing destiny state, one could truly understand and master the rules of the circulation of the qi of heaven and earth. He could clearly feel that Yi Hongyu's body seemed to have melted into the aura of heaven and earth on the surface of the pool, like a fish in the water regaining its freedom. There was no way to lock it, so he could not shoot the arrow. Yi Hongyu, you are indeed powerful to be able to break my primordial 13 arrows in one move. Ning Ke thought to himself as he aimed at the figure on the surface of the water. The situation was very clear, so there was no need to waste his efforts. Without hesitation, he let go of the iron bow in his hand and reached out to grab the hilt of his knife, pulling out the heavy padao. Yi Hongyu had been waiting for the moment when he abandoned the bow and pulled out his knife. Her charming figure appeared, and a few ripples appeared on the surface of the water. Countless tiny water swords appeared from the pool and stabbed at Ning Ke's body like raindrops. Sang Sang opened the big black umbrella. Ning Ke did not stand in the big black umbrella. He had been waiting for the moment when Yi Hongyu pulled out her sword. His face instantly became even paler and his body trembled violently. His left hand drew 2 straight lines in the air in front of him. However, he dragged the padao and rushed into the pool like lightning, splashing water everywhere. The water swords that were as fine as needles fell on Ning Ke's body. Most of them turned into water droplets and soaked his clothes. Occasionally, a dozen extremely fine water swords pierced into his body, ignoring his hard skin and causing streaks of blood. However, those streaks of blood were immediately washed away by the water behind them. As long as they were thin enough, they could produce enough penetrating power. It was obvious that Yi Hongyu had been prepared for Ning Kei's strong body after cultivating the Great Spirit. Ning Kei could clearly feel the pain and stab wounds caused by the fine water swords in his muscles. However, his face showed no expression and he continued to rush forward. Water splashed everywhere on the surface of the pool. The white waves mixed with the black mud of the pool, like a multicolored giant serpent. He was the most dangerous part of the giant serpent, and he directly crashed into Yi Hongyu. In front of him, two extremely sharp and unstoppable invisible talisman appeared in the sky above the pool, locking Yi Hongyu in an extremely small area. It was his most powerful two horizontal talisman. There is only 1 hour left for this month. Everyone, do you still have monthly votes? I will continue to write. There are still 2 chapters left today. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 650. Standing on the ground, the 2 barely discernible talisman lines were absolutely straight lines. However, if one looked down from the dark clouds in the sky, they would see that the 2 talisman lines had bent and were about to become 2 overlapping circles, trapping the bloodied Yi Hongyu in the middle. The 2 horizontal talisman was Ning Kei's strongest move apart from the primordial 13 arrows. It had appeared for the first time in the Lank Temple, and even Yi Su and Qi Nian did not dare to underestimate it. No matter how strong Yi Hongyu was, she had to be vigilant. At this moment, there was the sky above her head and the pond water and mud below her. Between the sky and the ground were the 2 terrifying talisman intent. It seemed that there was no way for her to escape, nor could she avoid Ning Kei's lightning-like padao. Yi Hongyu dived into the pond without hesitation, just like how she chose to kneel on the other side of the pond without hesitation. She never cared about manners when she fought. She would forget that she was the noble great divine priest of Westhill, forget that she was a woman, and even forget who she was. She did not care about embarrassment or humiliation, as long as she could obtain the final victory. Diving into the pond was actually a risk, because the water was already muddy and stagnant, which would affect the battle greatly. However, she swam so nimbly in the pond. Her blood-colored divine robe stuck tightly to her charming body after coming into contact with the water, as if she had become a real red fish. She was about to pass through the 2 talisman lines in an instant. Looking at the red fish in the pond, Ning Kei's face did not show any surprise, because he had already guessed Yi Hongyu's response. He paused and raised his padao with both hands. Before the padao fell, there were suddenly many blood-colored currents in the pond. The talisman intent of the 2 horizontal talisman permeated the pond water and cut at least dozens of small wounds on her body. The pond water swayed and the talisman intent was so strong that Yi Hongyu could not move forward. Water splashed like white peonies, and her figure emerged from the waves. She used her fingers as a sword and stabbed towards Ning Kei's brows. What a piercingly cold aura of the Taoist sword! Ning Kei raised his padao with both hands and chopped towards the wave. The padao momentum was heavy and unstoppable. He suddenly felt the aura of the Taoist sword, but he did not stop. Yi Hongyu looked at the padao that was slashing towards her without any emotion on her face. The Taoist sword formed by 2 fingers on her right hand was still stabbing forward steadily, as if she did not care about her own life or death. At this moment, if neither of them were willing to stop, then Ning Kei's saber would cut Yi Hongyu into 2 pieces, and Yi Hongyu's finger sword would pierce through Ning Kei's ocean of qi. He would either die or become a fool. The saber was still falling, and the finger was still pointing forward, carrying with it an awe-inspiring force of mutual destruction, as well as a ruthless intent of mutual destruction. Ning Kei and Yi Hongyu were both gambling. He was betting his own life, betting the other party's life. He was betting on whether or not the other party treasured his life. Both of them looked extremely indifferent. In Yi Hongyu's words, there were only 2 people in the cultivation world who truly understood what a battle was. One was herself, and the other was Ning Quebec. The two of them were too good at fighting. Their lives were filled with endless life and death battles, so they had almost identical mental qualities and equally strong fighting wills. At this moment they had finally reached the critical moment of life and death, but they did not know who was more ruthless to themselves, and who was more familiar and indifferent to life and death. If Ning Ke was alone, he would not retreat. His state of strength was not as good as Yi Hongyu's. Today, he had used the iron arrow to ambush her, forced her into such a difficult situation, and forced her to gamble with her life. In the face of such a rare opportunity, he was very willing to gamble with his life for Yi Hongyu's, even if there was a high possibility that both of them would die. However, Sang Sang was standing on the shore behind him. She was seriously ill and weak, and the whole world was chasing after her. If he died, then she would die too, so he could not die. Looking at Yi Hongyu's calm and indifferent eyes under the blade, Ning Ke confirmed that although she was the great divine priest of judgment, she could still die at any time, because she was alone. Then he had to retreat. Ning Ke suddenly withdrew his saber and blocked in front of his lower abdomen. Yi Hongyu's finger sword was clearly aimed at the space between his eyebrows, but for some reason, he thought that Yi Hongyu was aiming at his lower abdomen. This was purely an intuition that had been cultivated through countless battles. He came to this conclusion without thinking. Yi Hongyu broke through the waves of the pool. Her body was relatively low, and her finger sword was indeed aimed at Ning Ke's lower abdomen. It stabbed heavily on the thick surface of the padao, making a muffled sound. A faint light appeared on the surface of the padao. It was an external sign that the aura of heaven and earth had condensed to the extreme. Ning Ke's wrist was heavily injured, and he felt a tightness in his chest. Just as Yi Hongyu's finger sword stabbed the surface of the padao, a transparent Taoist sword condensed from the lake water quietly floated up from behind her, and stabbed into Ning Ke's left chest with a swoosh. Ning Ke let out a muffled groan, and the great spirit in his body surged out, covering his chest and abdomen. It shook the Taoist sword condensed from the lake water into raindrops. His body suddenly flew backward, and he spat out several mouthfuls of blood in the air. He fell heavily to the ground, and there was an extremely deep bloody hole in his left chest. If his body had not been unusually strong after being tempered by the Great Spirit, his heart would definitely have been pierced by this sword. Yi Hongyu stood on a water plant in the pool. There were dozens of wounds on her body, and they kept oozing blood. In an instant, the blood soaked her blood-red divine robe again, and then dripped into the pool under her feet. The clear light shone from behind her, and through the thin and wet divine robe, there was no sense of charm. Instead, it was exceptionally dignified. She was already the great divine priest of judgment, and was no longer the Tao addict who lived by the Yanming Lake. Ning Ke pressed the bloody hole in his chest with his hand, and looked at the woman on the surface of the lake. His body felt a little cold. He had only been in the knowing destiny state for half a year, and his state was not stable. If they were to fight face to face, he would not be a match for Master Chi Mei of the Xiankong Temple, or even Luo Kadi. It was only because he had the primordial 13 arrows and the divine talisman that he could use to kill people of a higher state. Moreover, he was good at fighting and used to sneak attacks. That was why he had such achievements. Today, facing Yi Hongyu, who was also good at fighting, was not ashamed of sneak attacks, and was more unscrupulous than him. Moreover, her state was higher than his. Therefore, the methods he used to win were meaningless. Looking at Yi Hongyu, who was walking to the shore, he suddenly shouted, "Stop!" Yi Hongyu obeyed and put her hands behind her back, but she did not stop in the water. Ning Ke asked, "What did you promise me by the Yanming Lake?" Yi Hongyu stopped in her tracks. Ning Ke said, "You said that if we met on the battlefield in the future, you would spare me twice." Yi Hongyu shook her head and said, "I used it once in the Taoist temple of the kingdom of Qi. I only have one left." Ning Ke said, "One is better than none. I want to use it now." Okay, Yi Hongyu answered concisely. Then, she looked at Sang Sang behind him and said, Then I will kill her. Ning Kei's expression changed slightly. He looked at her and said seriously, What's the difference between killing her and killing me? Yi Hongyu thought for a while and said, It does make sense. She stopped attacking and began to meditate. Recovering her psyche power had consumed a lot. Ning Kei was slightly relieved. Yi Hongyu said, You are indeed much stronger than before. But I still don't understand how you could escape from Chaoyang City. Even if you could use the primordial 13 arrows to sneak attack the monks in the Xiankong Temple, you would not be able to defeat Qi Mei when they started paying attention. Ning Kei said, That is a very long story about a little boy. I believe you will not be interested in it. I am indeed not interested. Yi Hongyu reached out her right hand and pointed her palm at the gradually calming lake. In a moment, a Taoist sword formed by the lake water rose from the lake and was held in her hand. She looked at Ning Kei and said, I am more interested in killing you. Ning Kei said, Didn't you agree to spare me once? Yi Hongyu said, I have already spared your life. Now this is a new battle. Ning Kei's expression turned cold and he said, When did you become so shameless? Yi Hongyu said, I used to think that I had no shortcomings in fighting. Until I met you, I realized that I still have weaknesses. So I have been learning from you. Ning Kei said, Are you learning to be shameless from me? Why don't you learn from my generosity and mercy? Or maybe you can learn from my calligraphy. Yi Hongyu ignored him and glanced at Sang Sang. She continued, You two will travel together later so you won't be lonely. Ning Kei thought of Kunimati's family who had died in his hands. He thought silently that such a tragic ending was never in his plan. Then he would continue to fight. His right hand had been covering the left side of his chest that was oozing blood. Unbeknownst to him, there were countless yellow talisman papers between his fingers. Those talisman papers had been soaked with blood, mottled like the evidence of a murder case. Ning Kei threw all the Fu papers into the lake. He released his powerful psyche power from his sense of perception and accurately connected with each Fu paper. Then, he released them at the same time. People who were good at fighting were good at learning from battles and from their opponent. Yi Hongyu was like this, and so was Ning Quebec. Yi Hongyu learned to be shameless from Ning Kei, and Ning Kei had also learned many things from his enemies in his cultivation career. For example, the countless Fu papers floating above the lake. This was what he had learned when he assassinated Gu Shi, the most powerful military counselor under Xia Ho in Tuyang City. Later, he used this method to deal with Xia Ho in the house by the Yenming Lake. In a very short period of time, countless Taoist talismans were released. It seemed to happen at the same time, but in fact, the sequence of each Taoist talisman was carefully calculated. Thus, the completely different or even completely opposite Taoist talismans did not disappear because they were released in a small area. Instead, they became more beautiful and violent, like flowers blooming dozens of petals and waves, until it became a sea of flowers and a storm on the sea. The aura of heaven and earth around the swamp was all summoned to the sky above the lake by these Fu papers. Countless turbulence collided with each other, and kept entangling and pressing against each other, directly cutting off Yi Hongyu's connection with the aura of heaven and earth. This was a very clever and magical talisman Taoism method. But for Yi Hongyu, who had a high state, it could only trap her for a moment and not kill her. Therefore, she was not afraid even though she was alert. However, at this moment, Sang Sang, who had been standing quietly by the lake and watching Ning Kei and Yi Hongyu talk, quarrel, fight, and kill each other sinisterly as if she was an outsider, suddenly moved. The big black umbrella was opened. She held the handle and turned the umbrella to face Yi Hongyu. Then, she shone brightly. There is one more chapter. Try to finish it before 3 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 651. Holy Haotian's divine light gushed out from Song Song's body. Then, it passed through the surface of the big black umbrella and shot towards the sky above the pool, instantly illuminating the dark world. Yi Hongyu was shocked speechless. She had never expected that Sang Sang would still have such pure Haotian's divine light in her body even though she had become the daughter of Yama. What was going on? She was the great divine priest of judgment and had profound attainments in West Hill divine skills. Logically speaking, Haotian's divine light should be the weakest to her. However, the Haotian's divine light from the big black umbrella did not fall directly on her body. Instead, it began to refract continuously after entering the talisman storm above the pool. There seemed to be countless mirrors above the dark pool. Each mirror was a talisman, reflecting countless rays of light. The light became thicker and thicker, and when it finally reached Yi Hongyu, its power had become extremely terrifying. If Yi Hongyu still had the divine light in her eyes, she could easily withstand Song Song's Haotian's divine light with her divine power of the same origin. However, the divine light in her eyes had been used up when she resisted the primordial 13 arrows. Therefore, she could only watch as the divine light hit her body. A clear whistle burst out from her lips. Countless flames seeped out from under her divine robe. The flames had no temperature and were actually black. It was the legendary fire of judgment. Haotian's divine light collided with the fire of judgment. A thunderous sound exploded above the pool. Yi Hongyu's body was shaken and fell to the other side of the pool. Her blood-colored divine robe fluttered in the air like a flag. As she passed through the talisman storm, countless tears appeared on her robe, and countless amounts of blood spilled out. On the shore beside the pool, Sang Sang held the handle of the big black umbrella tightly with her eyes closed. Her face was very pale. After confirming that Yi Hongyu had been beaten back, she relaxed and spat out a mouthful of thick black blood. Ning Ke had no time to worry about her. He did not even have time to pick up the iron bow on the shore. His feet stepped heavily on the mud at the bottom of the pool and his body broke through the water, pouncing on the falling Yi Hongyu. Yi Hongyu fell into the swamp at the back of the pool and splashed up a bit of fishy water. Her body slid along the moss for several feet before stopping. Her blood immediately stained the ground. Before she could stand up, Ning Ke's figure landed on her. He was like a tiger pouncing on its prey, calm and focused, but extremely brutal, pressing down on her body, not giving her any chance to react. Ning Ke put his arms around her back and his legs passed through the swamp mud. He hooked her knees and held her tightly in his arms in a very intimate position. Then he suddenly exerted all his strength. He was no match for Yi Hongyu in terms of Taoism or state. He only had the advantage in terms of physical strength and strength. That was why he decided to use his strength to crush all the bones in her body. This kind of method was very bloody, but it was not uncommon in the cultivation world. For example, when martial arts cultivators fought against sword masters, they would also use this method when facing death. When the Devil's Doctrine was at its peak, there were even more powerhouses from Haotian Taoism who died in the arms of the Devil's Doctrine in such a tragic way. There was nothing wrong with the method that Ning Ke chose. However, his opponent today was Yi Hongyu. Yi Hongyu left the Jishou Abbey and studied at the Revelation Institute for a short period of time before directly entering the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. She had spent most of her life in the judicial department. The judicial department specialized in judging the sins of the world and hunting down the remnants of the Devil's Doctrine. She was once the Grand Master of the judicial department and was now the great divine priest of judgment. She was extremely familiar with the Devil's Doctrine's methods and naturally had a way to deal with it. Ning Ke suddenly felt that the woman in his arms had turned into a fish without scales. It was very smooth, and no matter where his hands or legs landed, they would almost slip away. Furthermore, her body had suddenly become very soft and firm. No matter how hard he tried to crush her, the force was bounced off or removed by her. Knowing that it would not work, He changed his move in an instant. His left hand grabbed the collar of the robe tightly, and he lifted his left knee, viciously kicking the private part between her legs. However, Yi Hongyu's reaction was as fast as lightning. She rolled in the swamp, and the robe on her immediately loosened. She escaped Ning Kei's control and coincidentally avoided his knee attack. She stretched out her 2 fingers, and 2 sharp sword styles pierced through the air towards Ning Kei's most vulnerable eyes. Ning Kei lowered his head and used his forehead to block the attack. His feet stuck into the muddy ground of the swamp, and he stepped forward. The padao that had been hanging on his right wrist with a straw rope swung with the momentum and slashed towards Yi Hongyu's throat. Yi Hongyu stabbed her hands into the mud and used her left hand to roll again. Her robe was completely scattered, and she lifted it up like lightning, wrapping the padao in it. She dug out a ball of mud with her right hand and smashed it towards Ning Kei's face. Ning Kei dodged the mud ball and his padao moved forward again. Yi Hongyu summoned her Taoist sword and stabbed it towards the back of his head. In a flash, the 2 of them had fought for countless rounds in the swamp. The swamp was full of soft mud, which had a serious impact on both of them. Ning Kei relied on the strength of his body to attack at close range, while Yi Hongyu displayed her battle awareness perfectly. She did not miss any opportunity and used thousands of Haotian Taoism skills, each aiming to kill him. Yi Hongyu's robe fell off and had long been shredded into pieces. Ning Kei's clothes on the upper half of his body had also been cut into pieces by the Taoist sword. The 2 naked bodies entangled and twisted, sometimes separating and sometimes approaching each other. It seemed like an erotic scene. However, both of them were bleeding profusely, and they were covered by the black and smelly mud. The wind of the blade and the sword styles were so sharp that one of them could die at any time. It had nothing to do with erotic scenes. You have Sang Sang with you. You dare not die with me, so you must die first today. You don't even wear underwear, but you didn't forget to bring a comb. You still care about your body, so you are not strong enough, at least not strong enough to make me despair. In the depths of the swamp, the fog quietly arrived and then dispersed in fright. Amidst the shallow mud and moss, 2 people covered in mud kept fighting and shouting, like 2 capybaras in a bloody fight. A water mirror suddenly appeared in front of Ning Quebec. The material of the water mirror was from the ground. The dirty water mixed with moss fell on his face and immediately cut off his 5 senses. Taking advantage of this moment, Yi Hongyu's 2 slender fingers coldly stabbed into Ning Kei's left chest, right into the circular bloody hole made by the Taoist sword. The sword style exploded. Ning Kei felt a sharp pain in his chest. He felt as if his heart would split in the next moment. He howled in pain and broke the water mirror covering his face. His right fist carried the Great Spirit and fiercely punched towards the opposite side. Yi Hongyu's left hand seemed to be waving casually, but it contained the secret of the cloud hand of the Qingyun Temple of the Kingdom of Song. After such a long and dangerous battle, she finally found a chance to kill Ning Quebec. How could she not be prepared for Ning Kei's critical attack before he died? However, at such a critical moment she forgot a very important thing. The most powerful power of the Cloud Hand Taoism of the Qingyun Taoist Temple in the Kingdom of Song should be hidden in the sleeve. It was called the Cloud Sleeve. Right now, she was naked from head to toe, so where was she going to find a sleeve? Logically speaking, Yi Hongyu should not have made such a low-level mistake with her rich fighting experience. However, she had never fought naked like a child in the mud. Without the wind of the sleeves, the power of the cloud hand of the Qingyun Taoist Temple was greatly reduced. Ning Kei's right fist carried the Great Spirit and easily broke through the cloud momentum of her left hand. Although it was slightly weaker, it still hit heavily on her left chest. His fist landed on her chest, sending the mud flying and revealing her fair skin. Traces of blood seeped out from the edges, and several of her ribs were broken. Yi Hongyu let out an angry and painful howl. The sword style on her finger that was stuck in the bloody hole in Ning Kei's chest grew stronger and deeper. Blood was squeezed out from the edge of her finger. Ning Ke felt as if his heart had been struck by lightning. His face suddenly turned pale, and the strength in his body was about to disappear. He raised his left hand and held Yi Hongyu's right wrist tightly. He loosened his right fist and clenched it. He grabbed her fiercely and pulled her into his arms. Then he lowered his head and bit her muddy neck. After the slightly fishy smell of the swamp water, there was the slightly fishy but somewhat sweet smell of blood. At this moment, Yi Hongyu's left hand fell with the wind and was about to fall on top of his head. Once it fell, he would die. Yi Hongyu could clearly feel her neck being bitten. She could even feel her blood being sucked away. She thought of what had happened in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine many years ago. Her face suddenly turned extremely pale. The fear that had been suppressed for many years appeared in the deepest part of her eyes and then occupied her body and mind. Along with the pain in her neck, her sense of perception scattered and her body weakened. She finally believed that Ning Ke was not using this method to scare her. He really knew this evil Devil's Doctrine skill. However, the fear in her eyes suddenly turned into absolute calmness, shining like a gem. At this moment, Yi Hongyu's right hand was stuck in Ning Ke's chest, only half an inch away from his heart. Her right hand fell on the top of his head, as if she was caressing him. Ning Ke's right hand held her tightly and seemed to be extremely passionate. His head was pressed against her neck, as if he was kissing her. The scene was very intimate with Yama. Ning Ke could feel the change in her aura. He thought that this terrifying woman had decided to forcefully lower her state without hesitation like she did in the past in exchange for her life and the death of her opponent. Therefore, he stopped sucking blood and said in a slightly hoarse and unclear voice, "I am not Lotus. There is no need to kill me at the price of lowering your state. Can we stop fighting?" There was no emotion on Yi Hongyu's face. She said indifferently, "You actually learned Tao Tai. There is no reason for me to let you live." Ning Ke recalled the scene in front of the Red Lotus Temple and the process of learning Tao Tai. He smiled bitterly and murmured, "But I have never used it." Then, his lips slowly left her neck and he straightened his body. Yi Hongyu's fingers slowly left his heart. Ning Ke fell back into the swamp tiredly. He moved back half a foot and looked at her. He said, "I admit that I am indeed no match for you. We will fight again after I rest." There was muddy water, blood, and a thin golden thread between his lips. Yi Hongyu looked at him and said, "If you had continued to bite me, you would have been dead." She moved her fingers slightly and the golden thread on Ning Ke's lips flew to the ground and disappeared into the ground. Ning Ke only then noticed that there were many faint golden threads in the wounds on Yi Hongyu's body. He could not help but be shocked and asked, "What is this?" Yi Hongyu said, "When I came back from the wilderness, I buried 72 golden threads in my body. Each golden thread is a sword. If anyone wants to bite a piece of flesh from my body, he will definitely regret it." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.